I declare this meeting of the Port Phillip City Council open, and I welcome members of the public that are here tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalakut Willem clan of the Boomerang. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their traditional relationship to this land. Council has a local law that determines how this meeting will be conducted. There is a time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time. During public question time, members of the public can ask specific questions on general matters other than those that are relating to a topic that's on the agenda tonight. Members of the public are only to ask specific questions and shall not provide any statements or contextual comments relating to that question. Consequently, the official minutes of the meeting will only record the question asked and any response given. The number of questions that a member of the public may ask shall be at the discretion of the chairperson. There is also an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question or make a comment on a specific item on tonight's agenda, and this will be done prior to the council considering the item. We encourage questions or comments from the public that are directed through the Mayor, are not defamatory, abusive or objectionable in language or substance, but rather are presented in a spirit of mutual respect of the council and the community. And we ask all speakers to abide by the directions of the chair. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. And I encourage you to try and limit your questions and comments to around 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. And please note that all of our council meetings are now being live streamed. Live streaming and recording allows the community to watch and listen to meetings in real time, providing greater access to council decision making and debate, and improving openness and transparency. The live stream of this meeting is available on Council's website, and the recording of this meeting will also be available to view on Council's website after about 48 hours. The cameras will film and record councillors at this meeting. However, care is taken not to film or record images of members of the public. If a member of the public asks a question or makes a comment about an agenda item, they will not be filmed, but their voice will be heard in the live stream and recorded. So please also note, in accordance with Council's local law, that this meeting cannot be audio or videotaped unless permission has been granted by the Mayor. Just before I go to the agenda, councillors, I did want to just do a quick acknowledgement about the events that's happened today. We had the postal survey result, and council is very proud and happy that the yes vote succeeded, and 82%, and with an 82% yes in Melbourne Ports, our municipality. So great result, well done. So we'll go to apologies. Councillors, we're all here tonight, so there's no apologies. The minutes of the previous meeting, councillors, the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 1st of November and the special council meeting held on the 8th of November have been circulated. Are there any questions relating to these minutes? There are none. If not, can I have a motion to move? Councillor Pearl to move, Councillor Gross to second. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of conflicts of interest. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in any matters being discussed at tonight? Yes, Councillor Gross.
Thanks. I declare that I have, in relation to item 8.3, Domestic Animal Management Plan 2017 to 2021, that I have a conflict of interest in this matter by way of an indirect interest because of impact on residential amenity. 2 years ago, which was prior to me being elected to council, I signed a petition on dog management in the St Kilda Botanic Gardens.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. I will ask you to be excused for that item later on. Item 4, petitions and joint letters. Councillors, we have no petitions tonight. Item 5, which is the sealing schedule, and we don't have any documents requiring sealing. Number 6, which is public question time. Councillors, we have one person that's requested to speak during public question time. Ms Teresa Warren. It's been a while. Please state your name and suburb and turn on your microphone for the record. Thanks.
Teresa Warren, South Melbourne. My call is that I would appreciate it if the Clarendon Street footpath from the corner of Convy Street down to 221 will be repaired sooner rather than later, because this area does have the white paint marks. This is the route that I use a fair bit going down to Aldi, Post Office, Spotlight, Woolworths, because I don't like walking past the tattoo shop. And there's that many rises. If I'm in a hurry, or anybody else, and if you stand on where it's sort of on the rise, you can I won't say how many times I have nearly gone head over here. So I would appreciate if it could be repaired before somebody does have an accident, and some of the rises are a few centimetres high.
So, Ms Warren, just to clarify, Clarendon Street between Dorcas and Cecil? No?
Convy Street, the corner where Optus is, just down to where the Clarendon Hotel is, where Subway and all that is.
Just thank you, Ms Warren. Ms Blair, are you able... Oh.
Through
Mr
you,
Carroll, yep.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I'll have to take that question on notice, but we'll investigate it and come back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Warren. So that's it for public question time. So now councillors will move to councillor question time. Does any councillor have a question for the officers? Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've been approached by some community members who are concerned about state government agencies selling public land and parkland to private interests. Given that this land is often very important for local neighbourhoods, communities, biodiversity corridors, that sort of thing, do officers have any information about whether the state government or government agencies are proposing to sell off public land within the city of Port Phillip?
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Mr Carroll?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll have to investigate that a bit further, but what I can say is that we've been working really hard on developing relationships with VCAT and the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning to ensure we get a heads up when this land is being contemplated for sale. Our aim is to be aligned with these agencies to ensure we know of any changes in a timely fashion or any proposals for sale in a timely fashion. In terms of any current properties, I will have to take that on notice.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Simic?
Madam Mayor, the much-awaited and unfortunately delayed Fisherman's Bend framework and planning controls were released on 21st of October, and the Fisherman's Bend Task Force is now taking submissions on these documents, which will close on December 15. Can officers, first of all, provide some information about steps Port Phillip Council will be taking to respond to the framework and planning controls and any additional documents? Additionally, can you please provide some information about how members of our community can be involved in making and providing submissions?
Thank you. Ms Turgeon.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Council will be making a formal written submission to the State Government on the Fisherman's Bend framework and planning controls. This submission will be considered for endorsement at the Council meeting on the 13th of December. And Council may make an interim submission available to our community towards the end of this month so that the community is aware of the position that Council is likely to take. I think the second question was in relation to how people may make submissions. So certainly any interested party or group is able to make a submission to the process being run by the state government. There is information about how to make a submission on the Fisherman's Bend website, and on Council's website we have provided information and a link through to that website, so it's quite clear about how submissions can be made. We've also been assisting the task force to ensure that our community is well aware of the opportunity to make a submission, including providing information so people can be directly notified where people are located in the vicinity of the precinct. And we've also been using social media opportunities to make sure that that awareness is broad amongst our community.
Thank you. Councillor Simic.
Thank you for that response. One of the main concerns with respect to the document from my point of view, and I'm sure for many people who've looked through it, and I'm referring to the framework here primarily and the associated documents, is that there's no financial plan. Who's going to pay for the public infrastructure, the parks, the schools, the community centres, and so on? Can officers please explain how the framework has suggested that floor area uplifts allow a developer to build more floor area on the site than what's above and beyond what's allowed by the floor area ratio in exchange for making contributions of an agreed public benefit?
Ms Jeffs.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So, Council nor community has received any information about the funding or financing approach for Fisherman's Bend, so we eagerly await that, and I would suggest that that will be a strong part of Council's submission to the government. And so we're unable to really do a full assessment at this point in time about funding, infrastructure and gaps in funding. Just hand over to Ms Turgeon to talk about the floor area ratios and floor area uplift.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the planning controls propose both a floor area ratio control and a floor area uplift. The floor area ratio control is effectively our density control, which stipulates the amount of floor area a site can accommodate relative to the size of the site, so it's expressed as a ratio. This differs across Fisherman's Bend depending on the different precincts and also whether it's within a core area where higher density is proposed. There is opportunity for a developer to seek a higher development yield on a site through what's called a floor area uplift. That enables increased floor area to be provided in exchange for a community benefit, and the planning controls define what those community benefits are and limit those to additional open space provision, affordable housing and community infrastructure, and there's specifications about how that would work. So if a site is to have a greater development potential than stipulated in the baseline floor area ratio, then they must provide a community benefit in lieu of that.
So there's a huge amount of infrastructure required, and that seems like a good way to get to some of it. Will the suggested model be able to pay for all of the public infrastructure required? So, for example, with floor area uplifts, will we be able to pay for all of the parks? The framework currently sets out quite a number of parks, small, big, that will be included as part of the area. Will this scheme be able to actually get us all the way to ensuring that we have all of those parks?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so the floor area ratio and floor area uplift is only one mechanism proposed to achieve some of those community outcomes. We anticipate there will also be developer contributions, public open space contributions and other infrastructure contributions as well, so it'll be part of the package. So the floor area ratio and uplifts will definitely not cover all of the infrastructure requirements for Fisherman's Bend.
So do officers have an estimate as to what will be the gap between what's possible to pay through the developer contributions, the other contributions you've mentioned, uplifts and other similar measures, in the amount of money that would be required to pay for all of that public infrastructure?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, at this stage we don't, and we eagerly await those details so that we can do an assessment.
Last one.
Sorry, just slightly, still on Fisherman's Bend, and another topic that's quite important to many people in our community is around affordable housing targets and how they'll be able to be achieved through the use of floor area uplifts. So will the Fisherman's Bend housing affordability mechanisms allow us to meet housing affordability targets we've set for our local community in the city of Port Phillip in our backyard plan?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the Fisherman's Bend framework does set a target of 6% affordable housing. Now, Council's position to date has been 6% social housing and 20% affordable housing overall, so there is a difference in the target being set in the framework than Council has sought to and has reflected in our backyard strategy. Effectively, affordable housing is proposed to be delivered through the floor area uplift mechanism. So this is an opt-in mechanism which gives an incentive to provide affordable housing through allowing for additional floor area in a building, so additional units. The ratio that's been stipulated in the controls is a provision of 1 unit per 8 additional market units, so a ratio of 1 in 8. So of every 9 units additional produced as part of the floor area uplift, 1 would be an affordable housing a unit, which would be then transferred to a community housing provider or association.
So my question was then also specific to the in our backyard strategy, because the strategy sets out quite ambitious targets. How does the framework as it's currently worded allow us to meet our in our backyard strategy targets?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so whilst I've said that the targets are different in their composition, the opportunity for floor area uplift is quite significant at Fisherman's Bend, so there is the potential to deliver, I think there's 950 odd additional affordable housing units that we're proposing through in our backyard, 170 be delivered through council-owned sites and the rest through other mechanisms such as an inclusionary housing mechanism or an incentive scheme like this at Fisherman's Bend. So there's potential for the floor area uplift to deliver at least that and potentially more, but it is going to be subject to developers choosing to opt in and take up that rate. So there is no absolute certainty of the level of housing that will be, affordable housing that will be delivered, but there's certainly the opportunity to meet that target. So we'll have to see how the market responds effectively.
Thank you, Ms Turgeon. I might add as well, on Thursday the 30th of November from 6 to 7:30 we have another Fisherman's Bend forum which we'll be discussing our submission, and if any parts of the community that are interested, feel free to come along. It is open to the public. Information about location will be on our website. Any other questions, councillors? Okay, then we'll move to presentation of reports. Go to item 8.1, which is the Friends of Suai, Covalima annual report for 2016-17. And we have one person that's requested to speak, Megs Alston. Yes, please. If you could sit there, pop the microphone on.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
State who you are.
Yeah, my name's Megs Alston and I'm the Chair of Friends of Suai, Covalima Community Reference Committee. So it's my pleasure to present the Friends of Suai, Covalima annual report for 2016-17 to Council. And as you'll see from the report, it's been another full year of activities, both here and in Suai, East Timor, and a most productive year in terms of outcomes. Here in the city of Port Phillip, we've engaged with various sections of our community, both to raise awareness of our work and to raise funds to help us continue with it. Activities here include another successful student conference hosted by Elwood College, a well-attended fundraising trivia night, the organisation of a team of election observers for the election in East Timor, which was led by Carleen Horlock, who's the new coordinator now, and the commencement of a fruitful engagement with Albert Park College. In Covalima, we continued to support the Covalima Community Centre's work in the education and health sectors, in the empowerment of women and in the agriculture projects. So I've just selected 4 highlights from this year's annual report for special mention. During the year, the City of Port Phillip conducted an evaluation of the Friends of Suai friendship arrangement. The evaluation's conclusions were positive and identified some key strengths of the project. program. It's a unique program based on developing friendship, support and cross-cultural understanding between people at grassroots level. It features respect and support for Timorese-led decision-making. It's a long-term commitment. Its sustainability is assisted by having a coordinator at both ends. It features an understanding of mutuality through mutual learning, mutual respect, collaboration and reciprocity. And it features joint strategic planning. So they were the key findings, I suppose, conclusions reached by the evaluation. And I might add that our new coordinator, Carleen Horlock, actually contributed to this evaluation through research she separately conducted in East Timor when she was undertaking her studies and a placement in Suai. The second issue I'd like to draw to your attention is the scholarship program, which continues to provide educational opportunities for students from this rural and remote community who would otherwise not have the chance of further education. 15 students graduated at the end of 2016, and in 2017, 32 new students were enrolled in a range of vocational and academic education institutions for further education. The school is very keen to fundraise to help renovate the basketball court at the Suai Senior Secondary School, which has very little in the way of sporting facilities, although all the students there are very keen on sport. So Albert Park College is already looking ahead to possible student-to-student engagement and collaboration in future. I think the other issue to mention, which was in brief, was a contingent of East Timorese administrators. I think there were 30 people visited Australia in recent months, and they were warmly greeted by the City of Port Phillip, and they were briefed on Ackland Plaza and the Triangle Project when they visited during the year, and I know some councillors were involved in that. So looking ahead, we're very pleased to support a village lighting scheme next year which provides households in small hamlets in Covalima which are not connected to the grid with solar rooftop panels. And these will provide electric light to those households, bringing transformative change with the electricity that they'll bring. So in conclusion, I welcome Carleen Horlock, the new coordinator, and on behalf of our committees, volunteers and donors, I thank the Council very much for its continued support for this very successful friendship. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Alston. That's the end of the people from the public that have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions? So if there are no questions, do we have a mover for the recommendation to accept that annual report? Councillor Baxter and Councillor Simic to second. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Megs, for presenting that report. It's an excellent report. I've had the pleasure of being Council's representative on the Friends of Suai committee, and I very rarely meet a bunch of people of this calibre that are able to give so much in terms of their time, their expertise, and their just general knowledge. And I'm not just talking about the trivia night, which yes, okay, Dick, we won. But I'm really just blown away, and this is another example of the City of Port Phillip being somewhat involved in what is actually a really vibrant culture of volunteerism in our community, and anything we can do to support that is amazing. We didn't make this happen. We attached ourselves to this and helped it along, and certainly we make contributions, and I know that the committee doesn't want that to stop, but the value that comes out of this committee is actually not from our dollars, it's from the people that are involved. I think that the value that it provides volunteering locally, but also the value that it actually provides to the people of Suai, Covalima, is astronomical. When it comes to making sure that people are getting an education, that we're assisting with sanitation, issues. We've had conversations around providing solar panels so that diesel-run generators can be less relied on, and the operations of large-scale tree replanting, which can provide quite a lot of money to a lot of these rural areas for them to receive incentives to go out and plant trees. So there's the little amount that we can do here may seem like a drop in the ocean, but it goes so far when you apply it to these often disadvantaged communities, and these people are smart and hardworking and ready to do well. And anything we can do again to help them achieve their dreams is fantastic. So I think it's an amazing group, and it's been another fantastic year. The highlight for me was the trivia night that we held, that Councillor Crawford was very kind to MC that for us. I dobbed her in because I knew that she had the expertise required. And Councillors Brand, Bond and Gross were there, and I'm not sure... there were a few of us there, and Councillor Gross quite enjoyed showing up for 15 minutes and then crying about his team being the winning team, but it was really due to us. But really that was just another wonderful moment to see a bunch of people coming together that I didn't even know were involved with the Friends of Suai, but this is just how our community works together, and so I thought that was really lovely. Finally, I'd just like to give thanks to Pat Jessen, who has done some amazing work for so long with this group, and I personally was very sad to hear that she was finishing up, but she's got big plans of what she wants to do, and we'll all be sad to see her go, but I don't think we've seen the last of Pat either way. So thank you, Megs, and to everybody on the committee, and welcome to Carleen, and we really look forward to the next year ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Simic.
Madam Mayor, I echo Councillor Baxter's comments, particularly all of the thanks to the many volunteers involved. The only person that Councillor Baxter forgot to thank is himself, and I want to thank him on behalf of all of us rest councillors for being our representative on the committee and working so diligently with the committee towards some incredible outcomes. So congratulations to everyone involved.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Copsey.
Yes, just wanted to say that partnerships like the Friends of Suai, Covalima Community Reference Committee are really valuable, and this is one of the great ways that we can recognise and bring into being the potential for global impact from local government. So it's wonderful to be able to contribute to development and share our skills and also learn. And also to help a developing community to achieve really on-the-ground benefits like the water supply and sanitation project that I've read about, which has delivered clean water and toilets for use by 1,700 students at the local school, is an amazing benefit for the community. And with that solar project coming up, we better watch out because we might be in danger of having our terrible rooftop solar uptake rates eclipsed. So it'll help us get our skates on here too locally, I hope. There's great alignment with our council plan and our value of recognising diversity and working towards inclusion. So thank you so much to the committee for all the hard work and everyone who's involved.
Councillor Brand.
Yes, I would echo all of those words, and also just want to say, recognising Megs Alston here, the current chair, and so many other volunteers from the community and so many other workers, hard workers from the City of Port Phillip, the council staff themselves and councillors. It's a really valuable thing for us to have in our council life and in our community, a project like this that it gives us a chance to learn how to the things that we learn through a friendship arrangement like this, a friendship partnership. Sort of deep and intangible, and it gives us a way of expressing ourselves, I think, as a municipality and as a community, and as an organisation which are invaluable. I can't tell you exactly why. It's intangible, but fundamentally important to our personality and our well-being as an organisation, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Anybody else? I'll also just do a quick note of thanks, particularly to the Friends of Suai committee and the Knowledge Chair here today. I did have the opportunity to speak this afternoon at Pat Jensen's farewell and thanked her for her 14 years of exemplary service and acknowledge her terrific work and welcome Carleen on board. I'll never forget the moment that I went into the State Parliament to sign the municipal agreement, because there was a whole bunch of people from East Timor there, and I asked one of them, you know, what are you doing here? Because they'd come over to learn from different municipalities about certain things, and he said, I'm learning how to number streets. Another one said, I'm learning how to name streets. And I thought, oh, this is incredible. You know, they really need help and just can't imagine life here without that. So just really brought home how basic things are over there. It's because I haven't been to that country, but thank you very much and congratulations on the report. Councillor Baxter, would you like to close?
I think I used up all my material in the first go.
Done. Well, then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll go to item 8.2, St Kilda Pier Renewal. So we've got two people that have requested to speak to this item. Mr Craig Brunnan, please. Hello, Mr Brunnan. So you've got something to hand out there. Mr Brunnan, if you'd state your name and your suburb for the record.
Yeah, Craig Brunnan from Blackrock, and I am representing Earthcare St Kilda in regards to the proposal for... Okay,
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting us here to have our input into such an important project that is on the drawing board. I've just handed out some data. There's a bit of background information about Earthcare St Kilda, but also on the other document is pretty much the points we would like to make in regards to our support for the Pier report recommendation for design option 2. Okay. And part of our reasoning for that is option 1, which is the straight version, clearly would encroach further into the penguin colony on the beyond the kiosk, and as you may note that it would interfere. It protrudes in about 28 metres. I remeasured that just recently, and actually a little bit on the conservative side, but it would displace approximately 15 penguins from their nesting site, and areas for nesting on the breakwater are a little bit of a premium as the numbers of penguins are increasing, and to a lighter degree there is a seal taken residency at the other end of the bay and other end of the breakwater, and some of the penguins are moving away from that. However, the question of security of the nature reserve, if you like, option 1, in our opinion, would have even more impact or open up more areas to fishing, areas too close to where the penguins are. Over the past 4 years, we have removed 6 kilometres of fishing line and 350 hooks from the breakwater. And on top of that, there's a lot of other rubbish that the fishermen tend to leave behind. Therefore, as we move forward, we're recommending that, or asking, and in discussion with Parks Victoria as well, that control of inappropriate activities and signage for the fishermen to be responsible on how they work there. But as I have got on there, I hasten to add that 75% of the fishermen pretty much do the right thing and responsible, but unfortunately that 25% do a lot of damage. So we really want to stress the importance of keeping up the work in that regard. Visitor access, option 1 for us, we envisage that would create somewhat of a congestion around the kiosk, in the area adjacent to the kiosk, where you've got 4 different activities going on. Now that the proposal recommends and has in the design for a swimming opportunity on the curved groin coming back across from the kiosk area. Obviously, that has got some really good opportunities for visual of the city, but that area would have, if we go straight out, we will have, in our opinion, a lot of uncontrollable congestion, because we'll have 4 activities. We'll have vehicles wanting to come out to do turnaround in that turning bay, and therefore control at a gate, if there is a gate for entrance into the penguin colony, would become rather difficult to work with. So that's another reason why we prefer the curved option. We put it to Council and recommend that you consider to provide an information/education facility at the entrance to the pier, at say the beach end, so that people, before they go out onto the pier, can understand, well, not only the history of the pier and how that's progressed over the years, and a lot of people are visiting the area obviously to see that, but also information about protocols in terms of wildlife, what we're asking them not to do or do, and it'd be really something worthwhile if we were able to have electronic boards,
Mr. Brennan, are you going to go through this whole document because you're out of time? Okay.
No, I'm trying to stick to the ones I've given you, so I'm over the time. I'm sorry about that. Okay, I'll move on. Obviously, there is discussion about the new boardwalk. That is a suggestion of separation from the breakwater where it is. We prefer that to be marginal, but we understand with climate change that it should lift and slightly out, but we would very much request that we have input into that change and as it moves forward. And the last topic is we need to really think about rubbish collection and removal. I know that my friends at Parks Victoria like to work on the basis of carry in, carry out, but if we're introducing a swimming option, we're getting a lot more people out there. I really, and our group really thinks that needs to be revisited and a lot of work put into the thought process behind that. Sorry for going over your time, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brennan. Mr. Jeffrey Love, please.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Love.
Evening, Madam Mayor, councillors and council officers, and thank you for this opportunity to address you. Jeffrey Love of St Kilda, I think, is the current ID required. Now, I like the proposal for the Pier rebuilding. I think it looks very attractive. I note particularly is it the option 2, the curved option that has the swimming facility, and am pleased to see that Parks Victoria can come to the point where that they where they see that swimming off a pier can be done without risk. Given their concerns, the reasons they gave for the destruction of Brooks Jetty, it's a nice turnaround for them. And given that members of the community have concerns about the demise of Brooks Jetty and the UDF that covering the precinct that includes St Kilda Pier, what consideration is the City of Port Phillip giving to the whole precinct development, including the replacement of Brooks Jetty?
Thank you, Mr Love. A councillor may take up your question. Thank you. Councillors, that's the end of the requests from the public to speak. Do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Copsey.
I'll take up Mr Love's questions regarding consideration of requesting that Brooks Jetty be considered as part of the upgrade.
Miss Blair, are you answering the question?
Sorry, I was not focused. Was this a question in relation to Brooks Jetty?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Through you, Madam Mayor. So Council has given a amount of money to a community group this year that's supporting Brooks Jetty to support them to provide a proposal on replacement of the jetty. Parks City of Port Phillip has written a number of letters to Parks Victoria and the State Government advocating for the replacement of the jetty, and Parks Victoria have advised on both occasions that at the moment that's not something that they would support.
Councillor Copsey.
Slightly off the cuff, so sorry if you don't have the information, but do you have any update on how the community group is progressing with that design work?
Through you, Madam Mayor, Ms Ferrars-Miles had some information on that.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So officers are working actively with the Save Brooks Jetty community group, and I understand there's been a number of meetings over the last month. So the community group is revising their proposal, but we are hopeful that the proposal could be resolved by the end of this year, and then they can commence the work in 2018.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Or do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Brand? Can you please pop on your microphone?
Yes, I would like to move an alternative recommendation.
Can you please read that?
No, an alternative motion, but I don't
and
have
we'll
it in
see whether
front
we've
of
got
me.
a mover. Seconder?
No, it's not that one. It's one that I've sent, and I don't know how to get into my sent file. Oh, there it is up there. That's excellent. Beautiful. Thank you very much, I think. Yes, that's it. Okay. That is to... thank you very much, Mr. Chick. Thank you. It is to redraft... Should I just read out the red bit?
Just the red bit, please.
Okay, to redraft the officer's recommendation with these changes. 1.3 notes overwhelming community support for either option 1 or 2 to replace the pier. 1.4 notes that the community's notes the community's preference. Can we just cross out that? I'm sorry. Notes the community's preference. Okay, notes the community's preference for the future St Kilda Pier is 2-to-1 in support of the curved alignment over the straight alignment. Council supports the community preference for the curved option, but recommends that both options be further investigated in case option 2 proves technically unfeasible, and to ensure desirable factors of either option can be incorporated into any desired hybrid design solution. And then the last one becomes point 1.6. Oh, there's also plans in the top 1.1 confirms Park Victoria's conceptual plans align, no S on a line.
So just
no S on a line.
And add an S to plans, which you've got, and then take off the S from aligns.
Yes. So both plans align with Council's adopted planning policies. And that's the motion I would like to amend.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Brand, please speak to your motion.
Okay. I was a member of the Parks Victoria Community Reference Committee that overlooked the public response to in the consultation, in the community consultation to the Pier options. And my belief is that the recommendations of that committee are reflected in this version of Council's position. I believe we should follow the recommendation of the recommendations of that committee, which looked very, very carefully and considered deeply the community response and the issues involved. A little bit more with a little bit more nuance than the officer's report. It was absolutely clear. The first thing about the that community consultation is that there was an overwhelming support for the replacement of the pier, and both options presented sort of do that clearly. There was only about a 10% desire for neither of them to happen, or for the pier not to be replaced, or whatever. So that was the first stage. There was a clear public preference for option 2 over option 1, but there is also a sense that there's some degree of confusion in what people were potentially choosing, because there are many features of either option which are actually interchangeable. The point raised by Mr. Brennan over representing Earthcare on the same committee, that the turning circle and the junction shown in option 2 suited the penguin colonies better because it didn't intrude as far into them. But that same alternative, that same option for the layout of the turning circle and what have you, that could be achieved under option 1 as well. And it's the same with the swimming, the swimming pool area, the swimming area. All of those things could be interchangeable. So there's a chance of a hybridisation of between these two options, which should remain on the table. There's also potential technical problems with option 2, which might not be overcome. So it's important at this stage not to reject option 1, but to keep it in the business case investigation in case it's needed, or in case different aspects, different elements in one can be across to the other in a hybrid. So I just think this. I'm just very keen that Council aligns with the recommendations of the committee on the public consultation, and it's a better reflection of what the public said and how to interpret and how Parks Victoria, that committee, believes it should be interpreted. Totally support the other overwhelming thing, which I didn't mention, of course, is that the overwhelming interest in the welfare of the penguins, which is obviously going to be foremost in our in our minds at all stages, and it works equally well under both options, actually. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Pearl, you have a clarifying question.
A quick one for you, Councillor Brand. Given what you've just said there in terms of a quote, a clear preference from the community for option 2, doesn't that contradict your proposed clause in 3.1, which states an overwhelming community support for either option 1 or 2? Are you saying that there's clear overwhelming support for option 2?
Both are true. There's a massive support for a new pier. And within that massive support, there's a 2-to-1 preference for option 2.
Excuse me, just a moment, Councillor Bond. I'd also like to ask a clarifying question, Councillor Brand, and that may be a question to the officers. But what's not clear here is that you've removed some options, and in particular one, which is the previous 1.3, which talks about a business case and our support for that business case. So my question to the officers to clarify, will this slow down the project if we don't give this project support for the business case, as that's been removed from Councillor Brand's new motion? Are you able to clarify, please?
I had no intention of removing the business case from that.
The question was to Mr. Trail.
Oh, sorry.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the stage of where this project is, this is an unfunded state project. Parks Victoria have consulted the community. That community and what's before you tonight will be used as part of the business case to seek funding for this project. So it is a requirement that this information gets fed into a business case. So I advise that that's updated into the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Traylor. I think I'm hearing from Councillor Brand that it wasn't intentional to remove that.
No, that certainly should be in, yeah.
So can we please pop back the original 1.3 somewhere?
Through you, Madam Mayor. I think, can we just get Mr. Traylor to answer that question another way? Can the business case be done on both options 2 and 1? Or are Parks Victoria requiring us to indicate an option that they will then do a business case on? I think is the question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, my understanding is the business case can refer to 2 options, but they do need to have a good business case. They need to do a lot of detailed investigations, and their preference is to have a clear recommendation when they do put that business case up. But the business case can consider 2 options as they submit that to state.
I understand. That's my understanding as well, and the recommendation of the committee is that both options should remain within the investigation of the business case. But I think that we should support option 2, following the community. But we should keep both of them in contention in the investigation, so that parts can be hybridised from each other, or that they can go to Plan B if Plan A doesn't work.
So, Councillor Brand, and then I'll ask for Councillor Gross to say whether he supports it as the seconder. Will we put back the exact words? Supports Parks Victoria further develop option 2 conceptual plans for development of a business case? No.
Through Madam Mayor, if we inserted the words under your current 1.5, investigated, but reckons both options be further investigated as part of the business case development. If we insert those words there, would that assist you, Councillor?
That would be perfect in my view.
So after investigated.
I've lost my mic. As part of the development of a business case, that in case option 2, that now makes sense. Thank you. The second needs to accept.
Yes, I'll come back to you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Gross, do you accept that addition to the motion? Yes. Thank you. Councillor Copsey, do you have a clarifying question?
So my clarifying question is that in our report, at 3.21, there's a statement that the Parks Victoria Reference Committee have in principle endorsed option 2 as a preferred option. Which is correct?
I believe that my version is correct, and I have asked members of the committee whether that's so.
Mr. Hare, are you able to tell us what your thought, being you were on the committee as well?
Yes, the report was written prior to the final minutes being sent out to the reference committee members. So the final minutes do reflect the motion put up there.
Okay, so you're quite happy with
Yes.
the alt motion?
Yes, the minutes detailed that the reference committee favoured the curved option, but recommended both options further investigated and incorporated in the design decided upon.
Okay. Councillor Bond, you had your hand up. Do you have a clarifying question?
I was going to say, is this information from Parks Victoria from this reference committee been made public, and have we been provided with it?
They came in and presented to us, that was all, I think. But have we got any further documentation?
I'm talking about the final report with the final recommendation. Has that been provided to us?
Mr Hare?
It's in draft form at the moment. The next steps for Parks Victoria will be finalising the business case, and they will also be compiling a report back to the community on their response to the community feedback by Christmas.
Okay. Right, I think we're clear there. So we've got an alt motion that's been seconded. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Bond.
I'm going to vote against this, I think, and I'll foreshadow that in the event this motion fails, I will I'll move the original officer recommendation. Our job here is to provide clear direction to the officers on what it is we would like them to pursue on our behalf, and I don't believe that this this motion up here on the board does that. It's trying to say, oh, we prefer this but want a little bit of that, and it's almost as if we're trying to design the option here on the board. Well, the purpose of this is to give our officers clear direction on which option we would prefer. So we need to get off the fence, take one or two and send our officers away. It may be the case that at some point in time in the future some elements of option one are incorporated into it, but that's something to deal with in the future. We need to give our officers clear direction here tonight. Their recommendations off option two. I think the community prefers option two, so I'll be putting the officers' recommendation whereby we give them a clear direction for option two.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Pearl.
I have a very similar case. As with most things in St Kilda, Councillor Brand, your heart is 100% in the right place, but in terms of the wording you've suggested in the amendment, I don't think that really comes through giving clear direction to the officers. So I'm going to vote against your amendment on those grounds.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? If not, Councillor Brand, would you like to close?
Yes. Look, I don't see what is so unclear about this direction. It says that the council supports the community preference for the curved option for option two, but it says in the course of looking at these options that both options remain on the table. This is exactly the community reference group run by Parks Victoria. Its job is also to give clear direction to Parks Victoria and make a clear recommendation to the state government, the state treasury, and this follows almost verbatim their draft recommendation to the state government as well. So all I'm suggesting here is that I think it's important that we align our recommendation to the reference committees, and if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for us. I happen to believe it is the right way of approaching it. It keeps back fallback options on the table rather than rejecting it. So it's not trying to design it. It's actually keeping the design of it a little bit open rather than closing it off and just saying it's got to be one thing. I think this is absolutely the right way of doing it. I think it's in accordance with Parks Victoria's own committee, and I think it is actually totally congruent with the public response. So I can't see any argument against adopting these wordings.
Councillor Copsey, do you have a clarifying question now? Because he has closed the debate.
It may be too late, but But my query is whether the potentially confusing part of the alternate motion that's put, if it's not in 1.3 where it says notes overwhelming community support for either option 1 or 2 to replace the pier, I think that might be clearer if it just said notes overwhelming community support for replacement of the pier. And that might remove some of the confusion, but it's more a comment now.
It is too late, Councillor Copsey. We can't change that unless this is defeated. Councillor Brand, you have
finish
finished.
Off, having heard that, I mean, I would have been totally happy with that, and that's certainly the intent. And in terms of our understanding of Parks Victoria's position, in the briefing that we had in Council, this was discussed at the end of that meeting quite clearly in front of us too, and confirmed by Parks Victoria.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Now I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's lost. Councillor Bond.
I'd like to move the original officer's recommendation.
I'm happy to second that, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Bond, please speak to your motion.
Not much different to what I said before. Our role here as councillors is to provide clear direction to the officers, and I believe this motion up here on the board does that.
Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Councillor Brand has requested a division. I'll ask you all to vote again. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Bond, Councillor Simic, Councillor Voss, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Gross, Councillor Crawford and Councillor Baxter. All those against? Councillor Brand. That motion's carried. Thank you. Okay, now we'll move to 8.3, which is the Domestic Animal Management Plan 2017 to 2021. And we have two people that have requested to speak. I'd like to ask Ms Miriam Orwin, please, to come forward. Councillor Gross, yes.
I, Councillor Gross, declare that in relation to this item 8.3 Domestic Animal Management Plan 2017 to 2021 that I have a conflict of interest in this matter by way of an indirect interest because of impact on residential amenity. 2 years ago, which was prior to me being elected to council, I signed a petition on dog management in the St Kilda Botanic Gardens.
Goodbye. We'll call you back when we're finished. Hello, Ms Orwin. If you could state your name and suburb for the record, please.
My name is Miriam Orwin. I live in St Kilda East. I'm probably the longest resident in my street, having lived there well in excess of 50 years, almost giving away my age. Anyway, the reason thank you, Madam Mayor, for the opportunity, councillors, constituents and audience. The reason I've come here to talk to the Domestic Animal Management Plan is this revision or survey was announced at the height of my robust discussions and disagreements with the Domestic Animal Management team as to how they manage the Act, which is the Animal, the Animal Act. And the interesting thing about this survey is none of the points or the issues which I raised were included in the survey. I have actually done some surrounding research as a barrister. It's a bit of a habit doing research and talking to lawyers. And on the face of it, the methods used by the Domestic Animal Management team appear, do forgive me, shady at best, wasteful of valuable resources, council resources, in breach of natural justice, not in aligned with case law or equity, completely disregarding civil procedure, evidence and other legislation which applies to every act that the council administers. I don't really know. I was quite torn as to what to say, how to do it and how to present it. So very fortunately, one of my dogs, Buddy, you should have these notes there. He loves wandering around on the peninsula, at Mornington Peninsula, and he was apprehended wandering. And there is actually an infringement which demonstrates basically what the council's domestic animal management team doesn't do, and the infringement came along with a two-sided information sheet which explained to me very clearly and without leaving me in no doubt at all what I was able to do or not do, whether I could appeal, review the timelines, go to court, everything. Whereas I must say this is not the way the animal management team manage it. They come around, drop cards in your letterbox, want to talk to you, and then when you write to them, which I did on numerous occasions, asking them what the charges are against my dogs or the accusation and which dog it wasn't. I was given 3 versions, the last one several hours before they say I had 14 days and that's the right requirement of time. So I'm sorry, I will stop talking now and open the floor to questions, but I do believe, I'm sorry, that's the wrong thing to say. I withdraw that statement. I am sure that the way this area of the council is managed is in general void ab initio, which means it's outside the law. Although they're administrating the law.
So Ms Alwyn, I'm actually unclear about what part of the domestic animal management plan you find is against the law.
It's not the animal management plan, it's how the domestic animal management team, carry out their duties. The simplest way to explain it is I'm fairly certain that everyone here at some time in their life would have had the unpleasant experience of a parking ticket. We all know what they are. And basically it's pretty obvious which car it is because it's on the car. So, like comparing it to dogs, if you have 3 dogs, you'd know which dog it was. You'd know the time because it has a time stamp. You know the date. You know what you've been accused of doing. Have you stayed too long? Have you parked in a handicap zone? So you're actually told very, very clearly what you've done wrong, which is a basic human right, it's a civil right, it's natural justice and it's equity, whereas the domestic animal management team do not do that.
Thank you very much, Ms Alwyn.
So I think that...
Thank you very much.
Question?
No, thank you. I'd like to ask Mr Ken Phillips, please, to come forward. You can take up your questions at the end, please, Councillor Simic.
Good evening. My name's Ken Phillips. I live in Garden City or Port Melbourne, depending on who you ask. I've been a resident of the city of Port Phillip for many years. My family has resided here. My aunt's lived in the area for over 40 or 50 years herself, so I feel very connected. I also own a business called Dog Concierge. Dog Concierge was established 5.5 years ago, based from my home. We have 3 staff. We have 3 vans which are called Buddy Mobiles because my dog's name is Buddy. And I'm here and I'm thrilled to be here to be talking in support of the draft animal management plan. Thank you for the opportunity, Mayor and councillors, particularly Marcus, for the opportunity. There has been a development in the process where the officers involved in the development of the draft of the animal management plan removed a line referencing assessing a maximum number of dogs to be walked. We found ourselves unable to support that line, and I say we have a group which I'll talk to you about in a moment, as well as our customers and a number of members of the community. We do believe in the overriding and overarching rule of dogs being under effective control. If you have a professional dog walker who you either know or see, they believe in that as the absolute tenet of how they operate. It's very important to us because, apart from anything else, our financial survival relies on it, but also the dogs that are in our care and the community in which we operate not only require it, but expect it. The bottom line here is that as part of this process, I'm really pleased to report to you, Mayor and councillors, that a number of us have taken up a working group within the Pet Industry Association of Australia. The Pet Industry Association of Australia is the largest member-based organisation for the pet industry with the broadest range of pet industry and pet businesses. The working group that's been established has already established itself, I'm pleased to report, and has begun creation of a set of standards and guidelines. That committee consists of 4 of us at this stage. We are in discussion with others, but I would like to report, obviously myself and my business, Jonathan Whitelaw of Woofers, Ron Buke of Watch Pet Services, and Darren Favretto of Dogs Day Afternoon. Those are the 4 of the main committee at this particular stage, and we have already cast our eyes over a draft of industry standards and guidelines. The great news about that, we hope, will also allow us to have access to the Pet Industry Association's Ethics Committee and their complaints charter, which we think will further not only our reputation, but in fact be, as far as I understand it, a first for council operations everywhere with dog walkers. We're a fairly disparate group, but at the end of the day, we all have a great desire and a great need to be able to operate our businesses within the community that we love. I will just say that we have already established a contact with John Stematopoulos of the Animal Management team, and we'll be certainly engaging with him directly and with the rest of the council over the next few weeks.
Thank you, Mr Phillips.
Thank you.
Councillors, that's the last of our questions from the community. Do you have any questions? Councillor Baxter.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Ms Orwin referred to another municipality that provided some details, alongside with an infringement. Could I get some more information from the officers about what, how this plan relates to how we provide information to people and make sure that we're being as clear as we can when something's been done wrong or when we think that something's been done wrong?
Ms James.
Through you, Madam Mayor, this plan doesn't pertain to infringements and how we issue infringements. This plan has been developed in accordance with the Domestic Animals Act. However, it does talk about a process. We have the opportunity and we're required to review our council orders and our processes, and we've identified that within the plan. So that's I guess as close as a relationship as I can draw between the infringement that was discussed. We are required to be to indicate on an infringement the reason for an infringement. We're also required to give people an opportunity to appeal all infringements, which we do always provide. So we're required to do that under the law, and we do. And we have an independent panel that assesses those infringements. And just to add that if there is an error made, an officer error is a reason for withdrawing any infringements, and we would do so.
Thank you. Councillor Pearl.
Thanks for the opportunity. So one of the things I found interesting about reading your report was the population of pets in the municipality. Do we have any? We have lots of numbers on how much our human population is growing, but do we have any projections on how our pet population is going to grow? And then what, believe it or not, our
The numbers of growth since 2008 has been roughly 14% across that period. So the growth has been fairly slow. We had an 8% growth only in 2012, so it was a little bit of a tailing off. So it varies from year to year, depending on the age of the animals and other factors that are involved in it. But in answer to the what we plan to do with the future growth, the best we can do at the moment is to monitor. It's holding around about a total number of around about 9,000 odd, and we're just addressing that as we go along.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, if I could add to that. For example, in relation to Fisherman's Bend, where we're obviously going to experience significant population growth, the planning that is occurring there in terms of identifying open space and the types of open space recognises that, for example, dogs will require more open space, so that's being considered as part of that planning as well. In terms of the types of open space we would have and ensuring that we have areas for dogs to be able to be as well.
Thank you. Councillor Simic, and you had your hand up before.
Just following up on Councillor Baxter's question and what Ms Owen presented with respect to the incident. I'm still trying to get to the bottom, look through the documents of exactly the incident that took place, but it did go to some comments around the rules and also the interplay between the rules of City of Port Phillip and other legislation and other laws regulating processes around infringements. Would you be able to comment on that at all?
It's James.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes I can. There are regulations under the Domestic Animals Act and also under local laws which we administer, and there is specific information about those. For example, under the local law, we've got laws around failing to pick up dog poo and infringements for those. For that, if an officer discovers that. Under the Domestic Animals Act, we have things like non-serious injury, dog rush, failure to register, dog at large. So there's two forms of legislation. We also have order in regards to where dogs are permitted on and off leash within the municipality.
A follow-up?
So are there the rules that City of Port Phillip set out, but how do they interplay with any other legislation that might apply? Is there any other state legislation or anything that governs these matters?
Yes, Councillor, through you, Mayor. We have reliance on the Evidence Act and the preparation under the Interpretations Act as well that we are mindful of. As a normal course of events, all officers during their investigations are required to offer procedural fairness, and that's a paramount objective of council, to give every person their due and allow them to have their say at the appropriate time. We also, under the provisions of the Victorian Charter of Human Rights as well, to try and ensure that there is fairness and equity provided to all.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Councillor Pearl.
Section 3.1.6 refers to fencing of council areas or an objective to consider fencing of areas, and then section towards the end in terms of community responses indicated that people had indicated that Gasworks, Alma Park, and one other reserve, sorry, I've lost my spot, could be considered as fencing. If council is considering fencing off parks for the use of animal recreation, what consultation process will take place before that happens?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there would definitely be consultation required. It has been undertaken in the past when we've reviewed fencing in open space, and it's proposed to be considered as part of Council's open space strategy scheduled for review in the coming year.
Councillor Crawford, did you have your hand up? I've got a question while you think of that. Since November, you're not allowed to have your dogs on the beach till March in most areas except for the dog beaches. What I've noticed is before 9 o'clock there is no one on the beach anymore, and there is a lot of litter. Litter is not picked up, which is typically picked up by a lot of dog walkers. And what I've also observed is the people walking on the path. Because it's warm, there is so many people and it's incredibly congested. So my question is, what is the time frame around looking at areas on the beach to allow dogs prior to, say, 9 a.m. in the morning? What is the time frame for implementing something like that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we have identified the need to review dogs on beach between 5:30 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. in the morning in a number of beaches across the municipality, and that will be undertaken over the 4-year period. It'll be staged. We haven't exactly specified the timeline of when that will occur, but that will be undertaken as part of the implementation of the Domestic Animal Management Plan.
Thank you, Ms James. Any other questions, councillors? If not, we've got an officer's recommendation. Do you have an alternate, Councillor Copsey? Please read your alternate motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Voss. So yes, I do have an alternate motion I'd like to put to Council tonight, and it inserts 2 extra sections at 1.2 and 1.3. They're up there on the screen, though they're not highlighted in red. 1.2 and 1.3 are additions to the officer's recommendation. I'll read them now. 1.2 is adds the following action to section 10.6, overpopulation and euthanasia of the Domestic Animal Management Plan 2017 to 2021. Animal management officers will work in partnership with the Lost Dogs Home, veterinary clinics and animal rescue organisations to optimise the rehousing and adoption rate for cats and dogs, to reduce the incidence of euthanasia to the bare minimum to animals with an untreatable medical or behavioural issue. The euthanasia rates will be monitored monthly as part of the contractual arrangements with the Lost Dogs Home, and opportunities to further reduce euthanasia rates will be explored and implemented wherever possible. And 1.3 notes that Council's contract with the Lost Dogs Home is due to expire on 20th of August 2019, and opportunities to further reduce euthanasia rates will be explored in subsequent contract negotiations.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter, please speak to your motion. Councillor Copsey.
Thank you. So thank you to the officers for all the work that's gone into this report and all of the work that goes into management of our pets, basically, in the city of Port Phillip. Under the key action summary of this report, I noticed that there was no specific action to reduce euthanasia rates and encourage rehoming. And on reading the report, I was actually quite shocked at the levels of euthanasia that we were seeing in Port Phillip. So we can see at 10.6.1, the rates for dogs have declined over the last couple of years. It was 3.1% in 2015 to 16 were euthanased, and 1.8% were euthanased in 2016-17. However, for cats, the figure was 51%. In 2015-16 were euthanased, and 58.3% in 2016-2017. So the report notes that there was unfortunately animal hoarding that contributed to the figures in 2016-17. However, even taking without that, that means that a cat that was picked up in the city of Port Phillip and taken to the shelter had less than half a chance at coming out alive. So I personally don't think that that's good enough, and that there's probably more we can do if we focus on this as a specific action. No one wants to see animals killed unnecessarily, and to ensure that we're making good progress on this, I think we need to set some goals and measure our progress and encourage our partners in this space to do the same. So I've been working with officers to develop this addition, and I suggest we add an action to the plan to work in partnership to optimise rehousing and adoption rates and reduce the incidence of euthanasia to a minimum, and that we look for ways to strengthen the contractual means we have available to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I think this is a good sort of direction to move towards. I've had some conversations with some people around this, and they've obviously had some concerns about, things like dangerous animals, animals with an untreatable behavioural issue, for example, and there's probably very little question that animals that are dangerous to people, they should be humanely euthanized. But I think that we should be attempting to bring down these rates, and I think that as the state starts to phase out some of the more unethical methods of providing pets to people, like puppy farms and things like that, the demand is going to stay the same. So we're hoping that that supply of pets can come from rehoming of animals. And it is quite startling to see how many cats are being euthanized. And I've always had cats in my family, and it's very upsetting. But I think that if we can reduce that, as long as they're not, again, feral or dangerous or something like that, then I think that that's a smart idea.
Councillor Crawford.
Can I just clarify, though, that a large number of those cats that were euthanased were feral? That's the case, so that's why the number is particularly high. I just wanted to clarify that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct. So a large number were feral or had other medical conditions that required them to be euthanased.
Just to clarify my comments, they would fall under untreatable medical or behavioural issue in that case. So I did mean feral and otherwise.
Councillor Brand.
I'm going to speak against it in the hope that we might just get a slight rewording that might satisfy me. But I completely agree that we should be trying to keep euthanasia to a minimum. But I think that our primary universal goal here is to reduce cruelty to animals, and I don't believe that euthanasia for animals is in itself cruel to animals. In many cases, it's going to be humane to animals, but the way that this is written is that it is to reduce the incidence of euthanasia to a bare minimum, implicitly, i.e., to animals with an untreatable medical or behavioural issue. So if it doesn't have an untreatable medical or behavioural issue, the assumption is that it's going to be rehoused. But if it isn't rehoused, what happens to it? It's being condemned to some sort of permanent purgatory or limbo. I'm not sure what it is. I just think it's too narrow in the definition, and I think it might be actually increasing a degree of animal cruelty, the way it's stated. Can we find some way around that?
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Copsey.
Does Councillor Brand have a suggested amendment?
I think maybe.
I mean, it could be along the lines of not particularly to animals with untreatable conditions.
So we're speaking to the motion at this point. If you want to talk quickly amongst yourself, you can do so. Does anyone else want to speak to the motion? Councillor Copsey, would you like to close? We're up to that, or you... Councillor Brand has already spoken.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, I think Councillor Brand was asking the mover if she would accept a minor amendment, and generally it should be just for minor amendments that provide a greater clarification. So,
okay, let's hear it.
So I would be prepared to accept an addition to the sentence that says euthanasia to the bare minimum to animals with an untreatable medical or behavioural issue, comma, or no prospect of rehoming.
Councillor Baxter, would you be happy with that addition? So, or no prospect of rehoming's been added. Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? Councillor Copsey, would you like to close?
So just to address a couple of the points that have been raised, because I recognise I've been away ill and unable to speak with councillors prior to bringing this at the meeting tonight. So just to clarify a couple of points, certainly this addition does not override the sad fact that euthanasia is appropriate in some circumstances and the most humane option. It seeks to push for euthanasia to be considered as the last resort when there are issues, as have been described, that will prevent the animal from being adopted or rehoused. As to the comment about animals being in purgatory, I haven't visited the Lost Dogs Home for a long time, but I understand it to be a professionally run service, and that they work very hard and have been working in partnership with council to rehome and adopt animals. So I would hope that we'll also be putting extra effort into our rehousing and adoption program that will hopefully reduce the length of time that animals have to spend in shelter before being adopted out. So I hope that addresses some of the misgivings that councillors have, and I hope that I'll have their support. Just to close, I want to say that I have a little cat, and her name is Daisy May. And when I first got her, she was a rescue cat, and she was not in good shape when she was picked up. She had mastitis because she was the mum of a litter of kittens. She was also really underweight, and she was not very social. She was very skittish, very protective of the kittens, and at a point, if she got outside, she would literally hide under a house for days before I'd have to go and drag her out. But fast forward a couple of years, and she's just my best little mate. She's always waiting for me, or maybe it's just her dinner, but I'll say it's me. When I get home, she's at the door purring, she's drooling all over everything and putting fur over absolutely everything I own. So she's just a wonderful cat now that she's had the chance to find a home and receive some kindness, and I wouldn't give her up for the world. And I know I'm not alone. If you go out anywhere, any weekend, any morning in Port Phillip, you'll see that we're a city of animal lovers, and a stroll on the foreshore or through our parks will quickly reveal the close relationship that people in Port Phillip have with their animals. When the city of Port Phillip picks up a domestic animal that's been abandoned or is stray or is feral, we assume responsibility for that animal and for their welfare. So part of that responsibility, of course, is to act, sadly, responsibly, but it must include a real focus on giving animals the best chance they can to lead a healthy and happy life and find a new home and a loving family to be part of. So I urge councillors to support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Now, councillors, just going to rejig the agenda a bit. So I think we'll hear the Elster Creek Catchment Plan next, 8.12. Then we'll hear 8.6 and then 8.8. So I can... And then we'll have a break. That's all right. So 8.12, which is Elster Creek Catchment Action Plan Endorsement. I'd like to ask Mr Isaac Herman, please, to come forward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Isaac Herman from Elwood. Good evening, Madam Mayor, the CEO, councillors, council officers. While I welcome the amendments to the Elster Creek Catchment Action Plan, I have a few concerns. Regarding Theme 1, One Catchment, One Plan, basically, while there is mention of whole of catchment, there is no mention of whole of water cycle. And this, I think, is a bit inconsistent with Plan Melbourne and other policies. Simply put, there is no mention of any environmental and or public safety concerns in this regard whatsoever. Nothing about water quality, nothing about healthy waterways, enhancing wetlands and creating new ones and daylighting watercourses where possible. The public in Elwood canoe and kayak down the toxic canal. Kids fall into it, dogs jump into it, and people swim at our beaches in bacteria-ridden water after every rainfall. Following on now with regards to Theme 2, Strategic Planning, I think there needs to be a fresh, transparent and an honest approach to local planning that actually adheres to state planning policy regarding the identification of 1. Flood retarding basins, 2. Flood fringe areas, 3. Areas affected by the interaction of tidal storm surge and riverine flooding. There is no mention in the document of the terms climate change, tidal and or storm surge, and 3. Sea level rise in themes 1, 2 or 3. And I question whether Council has absorbed the first 2 Bay Blueprint 2070 plans that we've waited so long to see. In the governance chart, the Elster Creek Resource Working Group, I believe there's no mention of the CRC that convenes or chairs this group, as I understand it, or has been the case to date. And there's no mention of other members of this group, including Melbourne Water, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, nor mention of South East Water. That's it in a nutshell, Madam Mayor. These omissions, I think are glaring and could be addressed here tonight, even in brief. And if not, perhaps there's reason to postpone the adoption of the plan and for more thorough work to take place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Herman. Mr Jeffrey Love, please.
Madam Mayor, councillors and staff, officers, thanks for this opportunity. Jeffrey Love, Office in Kilda. Firstly, regarding the... I'd like to say that EFLAG appreciates the City of Port Phillip's contribution to the development of the Elster Catchment Forum and the subsequent action plan. I would like to note that I applied through Freedom of Information for a copy of the Memorandum of Understanding with the signatures, a signed copy, which I did receive, with all of the signatures blanked out. The point of getting the signed copy was to have one with the signatures, which kind of defeated the purpose of the application in the first place. I do note, however, that with tonight's agenda, there are 3 documents published, including a signed copy of the Memorandum of Understanding with the signatures visible. Given that they were blacked out for reasons of privacy, this just puzzles me a little. Nevertheless, to the substance of my questions. As I've said, we appreciate the work that the City's done with the development of the Elster Catchment Forum and the subsequent action plan. EFLAG, however, endorses Mr Herman's concerns regarding whole-of-cycle water management and stormwater pollution, and wonder where the CRC for water-sensitive cities sits in the action plan process, as they have been involved in developing detailed plans and their expertise is invaluable. Also, there are two planning panels currently sitting. One is the New Street housing development, which involves the DHHS, and the other one is Bayside Council's and Melbourne Water's C153 planning overlay. Both of these issues impact the catchment, the Elster catchment, yet the City of Port Phillip has no presence at either panel. One of the direct effects of the C153 planning overlay, if approved, would be the removal of the LSIO, which runs along St Kilda Street on the southwestern border, probably, of Elsternwick Park, and directly across the street are Elwood residents, who are the most flooded residents from the Elster catchment anywhere. Anyway, the City of Port Phillip has no presence on either panel. So what is the Elster Catchment Forum doing to address these developments, which it seems to me would be within the purview, in that they are developments within the catchment? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Loves. Councillor may take up some or all of your questions. Ms Helen Halliday, please.
To Albion Street, Balaclava. Congratulations to your reappointment to Mayor, and congratulations to Councillor Gross. I would like to just take up the points that were raised by, sorry, I've forgotten, by Isaac Herman. It seems to me that what we are really trying to achieve is integrated water management in the catchment, and that involves the whole gamut of both water quality and also flood mitigation and water recycling. So it would be good to have an analysis which, or a requirement that the memorandum of the group is dealing with all those issues. And it's also, I would also support the fact that this has been a long time coming, and we appreciate the initiative that's been taken by the City of Port Phillip in making sure that there was actually action on this issue by creating a body which actually encompasses the major councils. I appreciate that a lot of the issues here are going to be dealt with through the CEO's forum and the other mechanisms that are being proposed. I would just like to emphasise a couple of points. One is I'm concerned a little bit about the emphasis of one plan, and wonder whether we actually need an overriding aspiration and action on large infrastructure long-term proposals being considered by this group. There could be many actions which could take place as the opportunities arise, and it would be unfortunate if the action plan became an inaction plan because there was a failure to agree on a particular course of action in a particular area. We've also, through PASS, have raised the issue of two catchments, that is Bayside and Elster Creek, both being seen as complementary. We point out that Elster Creek is inevitably only going to have one outlet to the bay, whereas if the Bayside catchment was also considered, we have the opportunity of another 2 and possibly 3 outlets. So we would like that to be taken into account. Finally, in reviewing the GHD report, it's welcome that it is being reviewed. There are a number of recommendations in that report which related to water retardation. We are concerned, however, about the possibility that some of the larger projects might tend to be the what we would describe as pipes, which transfer one water from one flood-prone area and create water in another area. And I would like to submit as part of the discussion. It's to one side of it, but it's about integrated water management, which we discussed with the CEO today, and I think have his interest and support for some of the issues that we've raised. We've also raised these issues with Brett Walters. They relate primarily to the Shakespeare Grove main drain and the possibilities and opportunities that we see in this city right here and now in providing a retarding area, and we would like to see those things considered. I guess the only request we make at the moment, and I'm sure that it will be agreed to, is that we have the opportunity to have another look at the review of the recommendations that PAS is making in this regard, so that we actually speak to the officers before any further decisions are made by the council. Thank you. And
thanks, Ms Halliday. I note you're tabling that.
Table that.
So we'll accept that. Thank you very much. That's the end of the community question time. Councillor Gross, you have a question?
Ms Ferrars-Miles. We had an... Look, I note that the first line of your recommendation, that this is a high-level document but Mr Herman, Mr Love and Ms Halliday mentioned a series of issues that they'd alluded to. Mr Herman was talking about the water cycle and water quality, climate change and the absence of a reference to South East water. Mr Love talked about catchment issues and the planning panels on adjacent areas, and Ms Halliday talked about many things including adjacent catchment issues. So what's your advice about what do we do about those sort of issues which are clearly pertinent and but aren't mentioned in this high-level document?
Thank you, Councillor Gross. If you could just pop off.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So that is correct in terms of the report before you does indicate that this is a high-level action plan, and I'd probably draw your attention to the second part of the recommendation that notes that each action with the action plan, the next steps is to scope in detail the work to be done over the next 12 months. So in response to Mr Herman and Mr Love, is there's a lot of work to be done in terms of to actually work through what are the specific actions that we would like to do, and I guess in terms of that question of scope, particularly with Mr Herman around healthy waterways and water quality. So I guess the real achievement of this action plan before you tonight is the collaborative leadership we're seeing across the 4 councils and Melbourne Water to work together, which is a new initiative. And so there is quite a lot of work to be done to actually bring together the current information we already know, and also to be respectful and to absorb and understand all the work that has been done prior to this point. And that's what we heard loud and clear from the community at the Community Reference Group, that a lot of work has been done, for example, the 2011 GHG report and extensive modelling from the CRC. So we definitely want to absorb that work into the 12-month plan that's in the action plan before you. In respect to the planning panels that Mr Love has mentioned, Council did make a submission to the City of Bayside for Amendment C153, which reiterated a previous Council resolution in regard to Council's desire to ensure that all future opportunities are protected when you look at the catchment as a whole.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
I've got a couple of questions. I'll just start off with Mr Herman. One of his questions was whether Council had taken into account the Bay Blueprint 2070, which is a document very close to my heart. And my understanding is that our officers are actually quite acquainted with that document. How has that played a role in this action plan.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So, and yes, that's correct. Our officers have been quite actively involved with the blueprint. In terms of this action plan, I would say at this point in time, no strategic documents or projects or infrastructure plans have been excluded. So we're really at the beginning of working through what we're going to do for the next 12 months. So I can't speak specifically about the blueprint plan.
Councillor Crawford.
Can I follow up a question, please, around the new street development happening in Bayside? Is there any urgency around some of the thinking that we're looking to do in this action plan before certain things go into play, or is that boat completely missed?
Through you, Madam Mayor. I'd probably have to get a little bit more information about that specific application. It was a theme that was raised at the community meeting in September, and that is one of the key themes around strategic planning, about recognising that we may miss that opportunity, or have missed a lot of other previous opportunities, how we can get a better understanding about all of the large or medium to large scale planning redevelopment opportunities across the whole catchment, and actually see if we can get better outcomes for future planning applications. There was a particular theme around permeability, so the theme around how do we retain water across the catchment further upstream so that you reduce the velocity of flow in the southern part of the catchment in the city of Port Phillip. So that's certainly the aspiration, to better understand all the future redevelopment opportunities, but I'd have to come back to you on that specific application.
Councillor Baxter.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So Mr. Herman talked about, us making amendments to this document or deferring it. I guess this question would be either for the CEO or for Ms. Ferrars-Miles. What would it take to do that, given that it's not our document, it's the CEO Forum's document? And yeah, I guess it would have to go back.
You, Madam Mayor, you're correct, we're asking Council to endorse, in essence, a plan that the CEOs have put together. I think we've done that because it's important to have Council endorsement. The first recommendation, Ms. Ferrars-Miles, is right. There is a lot of opportunity to influence what's in the plan. I think, in one sense, this is about getting the CEOs to sign off on the agreed set of actions, but allows us to fill in the detail and gives us plenty of flexibility to build in community concerns or issues as we go. So I see this as a very dynamic document. I think it's significant that we've got the CEOs that have signed it, but it gives us plenty of room to build in concerns or issues or other pieces of work as we go. And so in endorsing it tonight, to answer your question, I don't think there is any restriction to us putting more work into that agenda if that's what we want to see.
I also have a question. I was quite interested in Ms Halliday's comment about the extending the scope potentially to the Bayside catchment, so that we could potentially get three exits for the Elster Creek catchment into the bay. Just wondering, to include that, would that need to go into the recommendation, or could that just be included as part of just the detailed scope? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, Ms Halliday raised that comment at the community forum, and I guess I'll probably just reiterate what I said earlier, is that potential scope extension is not excluded at this point in time. And what I would add is that all of the issues that Mr Herman, Mr Love and Ms Halliday have raised tonight, I'm very happy. I've recorded what they've said, and I'm the General Manager representing the City on that working group, so I'm very happy to take all of those comments on board and feed that into the next discussion and meeting, and see where we go from there.
Terrific. Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Then we have an officer's recommendation. So do I have a move for that or something different? Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Crawford to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I would. This is, for me, an exciting moment, but not that exciting. Not that exciting, because 10 years ago we went down to the Sir John Monash Bridge and we erected a tent, and there were, nibblies and drinks, and we celebrated a similar document. This is the burden of being old and having corporate memory. So this isn't the first time this document like this has been signed. Well, why is this different, and why am I genuinely excited? Well, there are several reasons that I want to quickly allude to. The first is that there's now a sense of urgency that it can't be avoided because of climate change and the frequency of our summer floods. So there's no getting away from the fact that we have to do something. Whilst it's true that Elwood always flooded, it's now documented on film and irrebuttable. And indeed, as Melbourne Water concede, 22% of the flood vulnerable homes in Melbourne are to be found in the Elster catchment. So that's why it's different now. A second reason why it's different is that we have highly informed, ferocious community groups who are goading us into action. And I think without those community groups, we are lost. It'll be another collaboration that goes nowhere. So I thank the community groups and urge their respectful ferocity to continue. Thirdly, everyone will remember, because it was a painful night, we committed to putting real dollars in. And that is, it's sort of like deeds, not words, from the City of Port Phillip. Fourthly, we've actually collaborated on a project in Elstonwick Park with the City of Bayside. And so that's an important precedent on which we can build. And finally, I think that the political reorganisation, which means that there are 3 councillors in aptly named Canal Ward who are... Oh, sorry. How annoying. Anyway, look, there are 3 councillors who, live and breathe this. And so it's a different political environment. And so I think from a Port Phillip perspective, this time it might succeed. But I urge everyone to be careful that this isn't just another empty gesture of promised collaboration between local government that fails. So this is just the start, an exciting start, but merely a start.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Crawford.
Well, I don't have that much to add anymore. I will just say that I do think the rearrangement to multi-councillor wards and the aptly named Canal Ward puts light spotlights on the fact that that is a key agenda item for us in the City of Port Phillip. The other thing I do note, though, is as wonderful as I think this action plan is as a starting point, I do note that we need to also advocate for the money to deliver the mitigation and the planning changes that we want to achieve in order to protect our residents. And so that is another key part of this action plan. It's about developing what actions need to be taken, but it's also about advocating for the money, because it will require some big money from state government in order to deliver what we need.
Councillor Baxter.
All the Canal Ward councillors are lining up to speak. Look, I think this, so I agree certainly with the sentiments of councillors Gross and Crawford. It was interesting when we first slightly before we first started as councillors, when we were having discussions as candidates, that we barely knew each other from a bar or so. Well, I sort of knew Councillor Gross a little bit, but this was the first thing we were talking about in Canal Ward, was about water issues and the feeling in large parts of the community that there wasn't enough action being taken. So it's really, really pleasing to see that we've come here. I know that Councillor Gross said that, you know, we've sort of been here before, but I'm quite heartened that in basically the first year of this new council that we've identified this as a priority. We've gotten to the point where we've gotten a number of different councils and agencies together and sort of rocketed off on this. But I certainly take the point that we shouldn't be taking our foot off the accelerator, that we not only implement this action plan, but given that it is a high-level document, also very much look to what has been left out of here and start to drill down to some of that more detailed stuff. I certainly take on some of the points that have been mentioned by the community members here, that we don't want to lose sight of some of the things that were mentioned, and we do need to make sure that that we don't have an inaction plan, as Ms Halliday said. So I'm very, very excited by this, as Councillor Gross said, as a starting point, and I can't wait to see where we go from here. But I'm very, very heartened by the progress that's been made so far.
Thank you, Councillor Simic.
All the Canal Ward councillors were lining up to speak and have spoken, but I just wanted to add that the rest of us councillors are also paying attention, and add my thanks to the Jeff Loves, the Isaac Hermans, the Helen Hallidays of the world, who are driving a lot of this work, pushing us and helping navigate us into the right direction, coming to meetings, asking all the right questions. So it does seem like we're at a positive step forward. I look forward to seeing outcomes of further deliberations, and agree that we need to advocate for more funding and best possible outcomes for the area, because this is an issue that will determine an impact on our municipality in an incredibly significant way. I'm sure we all agree. So thank you to the ward councillors for taking the lead, but just to add that the rest of us councillors are also listening.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? I assume you don't want to close, Councillor Gross, or you do? No.
I just neglected to thank the CEO and Ms Ferrars Miles for their extraordinary efforts.
Thank you. Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So, as I said before, I've reordered the agenda, so we'll go to 8.6 next, then 8.8, and then we'll have a break, councillors. So the next one is the hearing of submissions for the proposed road closure of Ferrars Street. So the northern section, Gladstone Street, the eastern section, and Railway Place, the northern section. Ms Rochelle Bell, please. Welcome. If you could just pop the microphone on. State your name and suburb.
Yes, my name is Rochelle Bell. My suburb now is South Melbourne. If I go through this, it might be a little bit quicker. I've been in about Port Melbourne's for about 7 years. I went into the city along the 109 shared path. Via Southbank into Queen Street quite a lot. There's this little bluestone gap in a fence. And I sort of didn't use it then. It looked like it just went into a car park. But then, now there's the upgraded 125A tram stop. And it's parked right on top of a short, what I now know is a short bike ring since I moved to South Melbourne. So I think people walk and ride through there quite a bit. I've noticed people doing it. So the people who walk through there can still walk through there, but the short bike link has got no bike signs on it. Basically, because it's meant for being for pedestrians and for the safety of the school students and the travelling public. So basically, the area is a little bit dangerous. On peak hour, Normanby Road, Montague Street, City Road, Clarendon Street just bad. We don't use that anyway, but it's not quite close to the area. But Whiteman Street will probably be dropping off kids. So for Ferrars Street Educational and Community Centre will put more pressure on the internal link in there, which would be the 109 Sandridge shared paths. And I did add pictures to this, but if you come from Docklands, which happens to be, where's that, a school enrolment boundary, and it includes Docklands, if people and families come that way and see a direct route, they will go and use that to get into the school, is what I'm trying to say. And the cycle infrastructure has been knocked a bit at this present stage, but I'd like to see that I'd like to see that link reinstated in a a prettier way, divide it, put a new ramp on it, keep the pedestrians away from the cyclists, let the cyclists go to the road, the pedestrians go towards the streetscape which you're developing, things like that. So, basically, yes, could you please get a bike crossing back across there? It's been in use, and with the Bishop and the Ferrars Street Educational Community Precinct, it's only going to be more used. So that's about my story.
Thank you very much, Ms Bell. Councillors, there's no more members of the public that have requested to speak. Do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Simic?
Madam Mayor, just to add, Ms Bell's provided some photos which are just being shared around.
Sure. So no one has any questions? Councillor Copsey?
Just further to Ms Bell's queries around dedicated cycling infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure, there is a bit of history on this project, and I'm wondering if officers could outline the efforts that council has made and potentially if there's been barriers that have prevented us from seeing the walking and cycling solutions that would have been our top preferred options for this area.
Thank you. Mr Trail?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. During previous reports, we've documented our plans around transitioning this Ferrars precinct, through the development of change that's going to happen in that area to try and get the right mix of how that place develops. Specifically regarding bikes and traffic, we've narrowed some streets, reconfigured parking, proposed closures of Railway Place, which is before you tonight, where we're hearing submissions, which will change the traffic movements in that area and discourage people going in. As we've heard from the community, yes, that is a quite important connection into the city trail loop for the bike network, which connects into South Melbourne. In our previous resolutions and discussion, we highlighted the importance of the Buckhurst spine and what that will have when that develops, and we would consider that connection through that S-bend in that area. But I will take on notice a look at the specific site of where that does connect in with a tram stop. That's something that we can take as a project team regarding the broader precinct and have a look at some short-term enhancements of that particular area.
Thank you, Mr Trail. Just noting tonight that we're receiving submissions that we've received. Just some of the submissions we're calling for a change in the parking structures and requesting credit card facilities on the parking machines. Also changing from 1 hour to 4 hours. I'm just wondering what research has been done to ensure we have the right mix of time limits down in that area.
Through you, Madam Mayor, in terms of the feedback, we did get various feedbacks that were talked about various other issues that are associated. In regards to our previous resolution, we consulted traffic engineers around the right mix and committed to understanding how that place develops and transitions. The process was to try and get as many short-term parking spots in multiple different spots around the precinct to help with that traffic movement. It was also planned to have shorter stays near the local businesses, the school, our community facilities that we are installing at that site and access to the park. And as the place evolves and changes with construction and with activation, we would look to change that parking conditions accordingly.
Thank you, Mr Trail. Councillor Crawford.
My question is a similar question. It's referencing submission number 7. I just wonder, as it is a transition period and that there are lots of businesses currently there and we are removing a lot more car spots, that I just wonder whether there is room to be flexible around some of the shorter underutilised spots. And I guess we don't have the direct data, do we, because we don't have any in-ground parking sensors or anything like that. But I just wonder that over time, as the behaviour change that we're seeking to influence in the ITS takes place, then we can lessen it. But to go from quite a, all-day parking area where people have used it for years to a lot less, I just wonder whether there is a little bit more flexibility, or is it sort of a done deal now? There isn't that room to move.
Thank you, Mr Trail.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we have resolved the parking mix in previous resolutions. Council have asked for us to look at that parking mix and we made a revised resolution. What we can do is make those spaces work as hard as possible, and that was the commitments we made previously. The school, for example, the school drop-off zones can activate as business high turnover during period of times, and loading zones act in different stages. And when the weekend we expect different activation, when we've got our community facilities activating, we're looking at ways we can utilise that to the best. In regards to the service change, yes, that is something we will be doing. It's not limited to just parking. We're expecting waste change, usage change, and all that stuff. So we will need to monitor that and update our services accordingly, whether that's street sweeping, bin collection, parks maintenance, as we understand how that space gets used once created.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Pearl.
Just one thing that came to my mind literally tonight. So just and it's not something I've read before or considered before, but in the school's submission or the education department submission or the building authority rather, that doesn't make. Is there any plans for the school to arrange staff car parking guidelines in terms of where staff vehicles will be able to be stored, or do they have arrangements for parking of their staff's vehicles for the school, and the same for council?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd have to take that question on notice. I am aware that the school is the principal has been on board prior to it opening. I've heard him talk about leadership in the way of the 80% alternative modes. There is no car parking provided for the school teachers, so that is an active consideration he would be considering prior to the school opening.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? If not, we've got an officer's recommendation. Do we have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Bond to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Bond, please speak to the motion.
So, I can remember a time when we would sit in this chambers speaking about closing this particular part of Ferrars Street, and we'd have received a dozen angry emails and the gallery would be full of people urging us not to make this decision, yet we sit here tonight and the only complaint we got was about the bike links through this area. So, yeah, certainly I think the attitude down there, I'm not sure if they've given up or if attitude is softened, but I think this is a longer process than we would have hoped to have had to make in order to fully realise the park down there, but necessary part of the process. So I think we're another little step closer towards getting that full park down there with this report here tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Bond. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak?
No, thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Copsey.
Just to note, we are receiving submissions, so that there is still community engagement in this process, and that those views have been considered. I'd like to thank everyone who's participated in what I understand has been a long process, and has done so with goodwill, and all the officers' hard work in consolidating and responding to the feedback over a long period of time.
Thank you. Any further councillors wishing to speak? No? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, now we'll move to 8 Point 8, which is the event strategy and the outdoor events policy 2017. We've got one member of the public that's requested to speak, Mr. Raymond Schneider. I apologise if I've said that incorrectly. Please have a seat, state your name and suburb.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm Raymond Schneider from Western Kilda, and I'm actually here representing the Western Kilda Residents Association, another ginger group that is involved in council affairs. As most councillors will be aware, our area is bounded on one side by Canterbury and Albert Park, another side by Fitzroy Street, and the third side by Beaconsfield Parade and Catani Gardens. Makes it a very nice area to live in, but makes it a very difficult area when there are major events in the area. And my comments are all about major events and how this policy impacts on that. Firstly, I'd like to say that we've had limited ability to look at the most recent version of the policy of the documents related to this policy. We're also concerned about the fact that there are two documents. One's a policy document and one's a strategy document. And that seems to us to produce an area where you might get conflict between the two documents and problems will fall between the cracks. The major problems I want to address tonight are related to traffic access, lack of adequate notice of traffic arrangements, noise, and loss of access to Catani Gardens. Now, councillors may be amazed to find that either Fitzroy Street and or Beaconsfield Parade are due to be closed on 6 occasions in January to March next year, ignoring any closures that might relate to the Grand Prix. In fact, both Beaconsfield Parade and Canterbury Road were both affected on the same Sunday of the Grand Prix this year, so traffic access is a real problem. The current notification process, which is by letter drop, is completely inadequate. Many of our members who live on the affected roads do not receive notices, and the notices don't go to anybody any further away from those particular streets. We are concerned about the use of public gardens by purely commercial organisations, as recently occurred with a major music event in Catani Gardens. The fences were put up around Catani Gardens on Monday for an event that was on Friday, which meant that there was no access to the gardens for the entire week. They took them down very rapidly after they'd taken their money, had the concert and gone home. So we hope that the new policy and or strategy will reflect some solutions for these issues. We believe that major events should be distributed more widely geographically. There are other areas in the municipality that could be used. Catani Gardens is not necessary for a musical event. It's a lovely area, but that doesn't add to the musicality of the event. And there are some areas, for example in Albert Park, which is not the responsibility of this council, which could be used. In addition, the major events should be more widely spaced in time. It's not acceptable to have road closures every second weekend during the summer season. We need better notification for residents, both those living on the adjacent roads, affected roads, and those inside from those roads. And we'd like to suggest that the council register residents with their email addresses so that email notices could be distributed, which would be a very cost-effective and effective process for doing this. In addition, council must monitor compliance with notification requirements as part of their monitoring of adherence to the permits for events. The homepage for the council on the mobile site, it's easy to find out where major events are occurring. It's much more difficult on the full-size web page where it's under the tab of Discover, which is not a place that I would normally look for that information. The council needs to ensure that there's improved traffic management both on Beaconsfield, especially on Beaconsfield and Canterbury roads, to minimise impact on residents. There are commercial organisations that provide this traffic management, but they seem to be completely neglectful of the need of residents within those areas. We recognise there is a balance to be reached between perceived benefits of major events and their impact on the amenity of local communities such as ours. We hope that this consultation process will result in significant reduction in the impact of major events on local events. Thank you for considering these issues.
Thank you, Mr Snyder. Councillors, do you have any questions for the officers? Councillor Pearl.
on one of the points that was just raised regarding electronic communications to residents. It seems a fairly logical thing as we start to build our electronic database through rates notices, etc. Does the council currently have capacity to target messages to constituents it has in its, or ratepayers or residents that it has in its digital database to send targeted messages to, such as text message or email, alerting them to the type of information that was discussed previously?
Thank you. Ms Shenikow.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we'll take that question on notice. Thanks.
Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Gross.
Officers, how often is the beach road closed opposite Western Kilda?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The beach road's closed 13 times a year, from October through to
with the road, it's only Fitzroy Street and surrounds are only how many times the wider area? Because a lot of the time it is just sort of the foreshore, but how many times are the bigger road closures? Do you?
Through you, Madam Mayor. There's 3 events that close Fitzroy Street as well as Beach Road, 4 including Festival. So Pride March, City to Sea and Melbourne Marathon all close Fitzroy Street. The rest are just closures of Beaconsfield Parade.
I did also want to ask a question. In terms of balancing commercial interests and community interests in particularly Catani Gardens, and I am really aware that most people don't want to go anywhere else in the municipality to hold their events. Do you have a number of how many of the closed off where they're screened behind fences? Some of the sporting events are more open and you know, so there's more open, at least visual access for the community. But how many do we have a limit or a number that we concede where they are screened in?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So over the last 2 years, so in last financial year, we had 14 events in Catani Garden and 4 of them were fenced. And the total number of event days in Catani Gardens was 23. This financial year, we've reduced the events in Catani Gardens to 12 and the fenced events are now only 3 events. And the total event days were reduced from 23 to 12. We've also gone through and a number of other events, around 7, also had requested to use Catani Gardens. 4 of them would have been fenced, but we redirected them other places in the municipality.
One event recently closed, as was referenced by the member of the public that spoke, was closed Catani Gardens for a week, and there was no visibility in there. Under the new policy, would that still be allowed?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, the event closed the gardens for 5 days before and 3 days after the event. We had tried to find alternate ways to do this, but discovered that to reduce the length of bump-in time, it was safer and easier to fence the event. And so a lot of the fencing is about safety for the public. In the new event policy, they will still be able to do that. We do work with events to try and find ways to leave parts of the park open for as long as possible. And that event we are talking about whether or not we can stage their bump in so that they're not taking up so much of the park all at the same time.
Any further questions, councillors? Oh, sorry, Councillor Brand.
Just following up on Councillor Voss's question, in particular the subsection of fenced events that are fenced so that they're screened, so you can't see in. So neither can the public see into the garden to see the fun that's going on, nor can the people in the event see out of the garden to see the incredible contextual setting that they're in. What percentage of events are actually screened and fenced?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So there are this financial year, there's 3 in Catani Gardens and 4 on South Beach Reserve. And one of the 4 is open air cinema, so it's there for an extended period of time.
So,
Councillor Brown.
So all of the events, all of the fenced events in Catani Gardens are also screened, so you can't see in or out.
Through you, Madam Mayor, most of them would be screened. A lot of the areas on the outside of the events are taken up with infrastructure, so it may be back of house for an event or the toilets or something like that. So it actually isn't all that attractive to look in from the outside, and some of the screening is actually about making the event look more attractive from the outside looking in.
I received considerable feedback around that particular event, and given the recommendation that we've got, it doesn't give you any opportunity to influence the policy, being them coming together where they're accepting it or sort of not. So I'm just wondering what would need to change in order not to have a commercial event take up our open space for a week and be totally closed. What would need to change in the policy?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So with regards to that, it would be feedback from the community as to whether or not we would run an event again. So this year, the Listen Out event received very few complaints from the community. I would have to take it on notice to give you the exact amount, but it would be under 5 complaints that we received regarding that event being in Catani Gardens this year.
I don't think you answered my question. So what part of the policy would it need to be altered in order to not have that ability to have that event?
Through you, Madam Mayor. In regards to the policy, there can be adjustments made if council want to have additional controls in the policy. What is within the current policy is council set an events calendar each year where we put out a major events calendar and we get submissions in. That's a permit process. Councils are engaged when we set that major calendar to an option for council is when those submissions come in and we present them to councillors prior to any in-principle event permits. Councillors could give us feedback on any particular event.
Thank you, Mr Trail. Any further questions, councillors? Okay, councillors, we do have an officer's recommendation. Before I ask for a mover for that or something different, the officer's recommendation, it needs an alteration, and that's to 1.2, which says adopts the outdoor event policy 2018-2022 with the removal of 5.4. Clause 5.4, which is an error. So, councillors, do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Bond to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to the motion?
In my view, one of the great things about living in St Kilda is all the events that are on. I know it is an inconvenience for some. We have road closures, we have noise, we have music sometimes up until a certain period of time, but I think that's one of the great things about St Kilda is all this activity on our streets. We live in a very a location that the rest of Melbourne is envious of. There's almost an obligation on us to share St Kilda with the rest of Melbourne. There's also the financial benefit to the traders in places like Fitzroy Street. I think it's well highlighted how they've struggled over the last couple of years. And that particular event that we discussed earlier, I was down on Fitzroy Street having an ale in the Prince of Wales, funnily enough, whilst that event was taking place, and the street was full for the first time in, I think, about 9-10 months, and it was just great to see so many young people. I know St Kilda's quite old. The crowd that hangs out down there most of the time, it was great to see an under-30s crowd swamping Fitzroy Street, and hopefully they all come back over the preceding couple of months. But it's events like this that bring those people to Fitzroy Street and hopefully give the traders a bit of a boost down there and give traders the confidence to keep trading on Fitzroy Street at the moment. So I'm wholeheartedly supportive of these events that we do hold in Catani Gardens and in our part of the world. So I'll be voting in favour of this recommendation from the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Gross.
Look, talk about stealing thunder. You've stolen my thunder, Councillor Bond. I just agree. Look, the one thing I do want to say is it's difficult to get the balance, impossible to get the balance. But this is a place with capital city functions, and it is expected of tourist centres that have to provide popular, accessible, well-visited places for celebrations of the public. And I accept that we have to provide those places. We have to provide sports events, and that's just part of our obligations of being in the centre of life. I know people think that the dollar is sordid, but in 7.3.2, I can't help but notice that consultation has shown that 74% of event attendees spent money outside of the event, and they spent $50 each. And we just can't afford to ignore that impact on our traders, and our traders have struggled. So I agree with you, Councillor Bond. Thanks very much for moving it.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Crawford.
I will be supporting the recommendation. I agree with both Councillor Gross and Bond. The extra points I wanted to make is the face of hospitality and where cool events take place has changed a lot over the last 5 or 6 years, and there's lots of pockets in Melbourne that are now hipper and cooler than St Kilda, which is the original hotspot in Melbourne. So, and I think that we need to get the balance right, but we definitely need to encourage people to come to our great city and spend their money and want to frequent here. And I think the balance between traders and local amenity is important, but I am heartened to hear the difference in the number of events being held in Catani Gardens, and it's obvious that already big changes have happened since the feedback from the community. And I also note when Oktoberfest was happening down on the Ackland Street end, there were more people in Lederhosen than I'd seen in a long time, and they were spending money before they went to the event. So I support this because I do believe that there has been a balance, and I do know that the events team are trying to spread the love of the events into other locations within the municipality, which is not always an easy thing to do. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Brand.
Yes, I'll support it too. I agree with Councillor Gross in particular. The mention that it's that the St Kilda foreshore and in fact the whole of Port Phillip foreshore does fulfil a sort of a capital city function. I've always premised my devotion to St Kilda in particular on the notion that it actually belongs to the whole of Melbourne, and not just to the lucky people who live there. But we are often the best people to consult about it, but it belongs to everybody in a much wider sense. And so the events are going to be more than what we want as residents ourselves, but we want to live in a place that does more than than local itself as well. And it really brought it home to me, this conflict. I think the most important thing is that the events that we have there are curated, and we have the ability to curate it. I think this policy gives us that ability, because there are many, economically viable events which are not going to be suitable for there. So, we need to be able to say no to most. I personally think that totally screened events are probably inappropriate there. But when my partner and I drove back into St Kilda the other day from being out in the country, my reaction was, there's an inappropriate event, and my partner's reaction is, isn't it great to arrive back into a real city? It was an important metropolitan scale event, music event of great credibility. Pardon? Yeah. That's what I say often. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult it's very difficult to get the balance on these things, and I think this policy at least gives us the ability and the responsibility to curate it when it comes to actually choosing the events that go on the calendar, or vetoing them or whatever. But we have that ability. It's up to us to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Copsey.
I'd like to acknowledge Mr Snyder for coming and speaking tonight. Obviously, he's got the voice of the residents who are affected by our struggle to find the balance here, and we do have a municipality that serves a lot of needs, some for the people who call this place home, and some who love to come and visit it because it's a beautiful place with a really thriving culture. So just wanted to emphasise that the consultation has revealed themes that have definitely been taken into account in formulating these strategies. You will see that there's reduced frequency of street closures, reduced frequency of closed events, and a real push to try and make more spaces in the municipality available for people to host their events. I particularly am looking forward to seeing how we can use our event strategy to promote activation in those areas of our municipality where we need it, and also to start building the creative culture that we want to see in Fisherman's Bend. So it's an ongoing conversation and process. Thank you to everyone who's contributed, and we're looking forward to another great year of events on our calendar in the amazing city of Port Phillip.
Thank you. Anybody else wanting to speak? If not, Councillor Bond, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Now we're going to have a 5-minute break. So please come back at 9:15. Thank you. Councillors, welcome back. I am going to go to 8.14 next, which is 98 Dow Street, Port Melbourne. This morning we had our planning forum, and we heard from members of the public about that particular application, so we don't have anyone to speak at this meeting. So, councillors, do you have any questions of the officers in relation to 98 Dow Street, Port Melbourne? Okay. If not, we've got an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that, or something different? Councillor Bond to move. Councillor Simic to second. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, I don't think there's much to say. Thank you.
Councillor Simic.
Madam Mayor, I think we've spent quite a bit of time discussing it. I just wanted to thank people who came and presented to us, and I know that there's still one person in the gallery here tonight, a person who's waited for a long time for us to discuss this tonight. I just wanted to thank you for participating and knowing, and like you to know that it's always very difficult for us to make decisions around planning, because they always impact on not just the person who's building, but all of their neighbours, and they're very difficult decisions.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Brand.
Thank you. I would like to just continue Councillor Simic's sentiment there to the owners of the apartment next door, which is affected by some overshadowing on their I think this would be unexpected to them that they would have another floor built next to their balcony, but I don't think it's actually improper that it is. I think it's the sort of thing that, given the size of the balcony and given the rules to be applied, I think it's unfortunately something which they will have to live with and be able to live with. I can't see any way of reasonably making making a significant difference to them with this planning application. So I do feel rather bad about it, but I just think it's in the end reasonable.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Bond, close? No? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to 100 Park Street. South Melbourne. Again, we heard this from the Planning Forum this morning. So there are no members of the public to speak now. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? There are none, so we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Bond to move, Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Copsey, would anyone else like to speak? If not, they'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. And we may as well do the other planning one while we're here, which is 8.13. which is 10 to 12 and 14 to 16 Boundary Street, South Melbourne. Again, we heard from members of the public this morning, so there are no members to speak here. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Bond, Councillor Copsey to second. Would you like to speak to the motion? No? Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Great, right. So the VCAT appeal, I suppose, is the last one. So we'll go to that one, 8.16, which is 245 to 251 Normanby Road, South Melbourne. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? There are none. Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Bond to move. Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Bond. No one wishes to speak. Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Great. So we'll move back to the agenda. 8.4, which is the awarding of towing obstruction vehicles and vehicles from Clearways contract. There are no members of the public wishing to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Note there are none. Happy to move. Councillor Gross. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond. Do you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. 8.5, South Melbourne Market, the extension of term for community members of South Melbourne Market Committee. Again, we have no members of the public requested to speak. Do I have does councillors got any questions of the officers? We have a mover, Councillor Simic. Councillor Bond to second. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just to say that as somebody who has the pleasure of serving the South Melbourne Market Committee, Violetta and Andrew, who are the members that we're seeking an extension for tonight, are incredibly hardworking and excellent participants in our group, and have dedicated a lot of their time and commitment towards the South Melbourne Market. So I wholeheartedly support this extension, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Bond? No? Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Move to 8.7, which is the child safe standards. There's no one that's requested to speak to this item. Councillors, do you have any questions? I have a question. Just wondering why we are adopting this now. Ms Bryce.
Through you, Madam Mayor. These standards are a new introduction, a new piece of legislation and compulsory requirement on service providers and organisations. So whilst we have had safety mechanisms in place for children in our care, this is a new requirement that's on the whole organisation and is about building a culture in the community as well.
Thank you. And who drafted the statement of commitment?
Officers have drafted it in consultation with the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare, and it has been through a consultation process internally with staff.
Thank you, Ms Bryce. Councillors, have any questions of officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Copsey to move. Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak?
It's obviously very important that Council publicly commits to making our city a place that's safe for children, and I'm particularly happy to see that diversity is specifically acknowledged and covered by our statement. Thank you to the officers for drafting it.
Councillor Gross? No, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We've done 8.8, so we'll move on to 8.9, which is the Middle Park Library. Councillors, we have no members of the public that have requested to speak. Do you have any questions? Councillor Pearl.
A couple of questions on this one. 1.1 and 1.2 it asks us to endorse the refocusing of the Mill Park Library, and then 1.2 says that we approve the process for consultation. What is the purpose of the consultation, as it could potentially be perceived that we've already made the decision on what we're going to do to repurpose this building?
Thank you, Ms Schoenekow.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The consultation is to go out to the local community and let them know the plans. So it is really a consultation to seek their feedback on what we are proposing, rather than starting with a clean sheet of paper and asking the question, what is their what ideas do they have? We're actually proposing an opportunity for the Middle Park Library. Excuse me.
Councillor Pearl.
So 3.12 says to move the physical collection of books from the library. Why would we still call it a library if it had no books?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Libraries of the 21st century are about knowledge and how we share information, and are very much with a community focus, and also have a very large e-collection. So at the Middle Park Library, they will still be able to work with a librarian and access our collection, order items that can be picked up at our other libraries, including Albert Park, which is 1.5 k's away. But they can also access all our online collection, which our members can currently do from the comfort of their own home.
And one final one, I'm just wrapping these off to keep them quick. 3.14 says users will still be able to learn, library users will be able to learn new skills in web design, digital illustration, etc. Are these the focus users, the current users of the library, or new ones? If they're new ones to the library, what research has been done to determine our target library user, who the target library user is, and what were the results of the research?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So there's a couple of points. So the offer is inclusive of new, existing and also potential new library users. Most of the research, I'd say, is anecdotally observation, what we know from our other branch activities. So if you use St Kilda as example, which is our busiest internet and web-based activity branch, we've got quite clear feedback from patrons in terms of the sorts of resources they're interested in getting support with, both on-site from staff and also through tutorials, online support resources as well. So it's really picking up what we're seeing in branches in terms of identified gaps that we can address.
And through you, Madam Mayor, just following on from that, Damien and I are both members of public library groups that meet at the State Library in Melbourne, where we also share research that is done for the public libraries. And if we follow the example that the State Library itself is making, they're currently refurbishing an area in the State Library, $3 million, to make it a space for entrepreneurs and creatives.
Thank you, Ms Chernikau. Councillor Gross.
Ms Chernikau, it is true to say that they're doing that at the State Library, but it's also true to say that people actually visit the State Library. Can that really be said of Middle Park?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we do have the statistics here for you. And it is true that Middle Park Library is our smallest library, and its use is not as great as the other libraries. And this is really an acknowledgement of thinking how we can use this space in a new way, look after our existing members who use Middle Park, including, for example, a book club that will still remain there, but also take the opportunity to welcome in some new members. And so we are looking at increasing the patronage at Middle Park Library. Would you like me to provide the numbers? I might ask you to do that, Damien.
Sure.
Through you, Madam Mayor, sorry. So the last complete year, Councillor, so 2016-2017, so in terms of the whole Port Phillip service, we had around 687,000 people through the door. That's for the whole of our 5 branches. Middle Park, it was a shade over 11,500 across the course of the year, and a shade under 8,000 in terms, that's loans, sorry, and in terms of visits, it was a shade under 8,000. Current year, we're on track to match that, so data as of the end of October. For this year, we've had about 3,000 visits currently year to date and just under 5,000 loans.
How much has been spent in capital improvements over the past 10 years?
Again, through you, Madam Mayor. So in terms of capital works, the actual community centre itself, so mindful that Middle Park Library is part of the broader community centre facility, there's been around about $1.2 million spent on the whole centre since 2007. In terms of the suite of works, that includes primarily things like environmental retrofitting, installing the lift, work around compliance for both maternal child health and the kinder. So a minuscule amount of that 1.2 million would actually be relevant for the library. For the actual library space, I'd estimate probably in the vicinity of around 80k over the last 8 to 10 years. That's in terms of capital works. In terms of our operating costs, our 2 main components are labour and also the collection and resources on site in the branch. Our labour costs over that period would probably average at about 45 to 50k per year. So 2017, our current labour figure is allocated at about 63k for the current year. And in terms of CapEx on the collection, over the whole 10-year cycle, the total amount spent is around 179k, and that's made up of about 165 in terms of capital, book stock, and around 14k in things like magazines and serials, non-capital.
And the 80,000 you mentioned, does that include all of the new window, all of that sort of?
Yes.
And the moving of the relocating of the entrance.
So the 1.2, sorry, Councillor, the 1.2 I mentioned would have been the major work to the facility. So that would have been around. So some of the entry arrangements, which were for compliance for the kinder, that would have been encompassed in that $1.2 million.
Right. So my recollection is that the entrance has been moved, the shelving's been rearranged, it's been recarpeted, and new windows, and you say that only comes to 80,000.
The entrance, that probably wouldn't, through you, Madam Mayor, my apologies, the entrance, Councillor Gross, I'd need to check that, but in terms of the minor capital works, carpeting, painting, that would be encompassed in that 80k figure. I could check the entrance dollars for you, though, the entrance configuration. Yeah.
I've got a question too. I'm just wondering, how is this different to an internet cafe, a commercial internet cafe?
Through you, Madam Mayor, internet cafes generally aren't staffed by librarians. So I think, you know, there's access to technology and there's informed access to technology and services, and the informed access is where we come in to the picture. So I think we often find that people assume, particularly people get into grips with the merging in new technologies, older users who may not be quite so au fait as the younger generation with iPhones, etc. That's where our staff skills come into play, I think, in terms of directing people in the right direction, providing them support, training, assistance. So we function very differently to an internet cafe.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there's also the programming that an internet cafe doesn't offer. So, for example, we are currently in partnership with the youth team and with economic development, talking with a youth organisation about running a program for youth entrepreneurs and people who are young who are looking at starting up their own business. And the age group, the demographic for that group is 18 to 27, which is traditionally a very hard demographic for us to connect with across council.
Councillor Baxter.
Can I also just clarify as well that in the direction of the Middle Park Library as a creative and collaborative learning environment, that there would also be provided certain software subscriptions for software that might be prohibitively expensive to obtain otherwise. Is that correct?
Correct, through you, Madam Mayor. That's probably the best example is lynda.com, a new product that is available through a couple of neighbouring Metro Library services, which has got very, very high utilisation. It's a new offer for us that will be Middle Park as well as the whole service, and that's prohibitively expensive for an individual, things like CAD software, digital publishing, those sorts of things. So the training and support as well as access to the resources.
Councillor Bond.
If you said to me, and forget this idea, just came with some average idea and said, I want to pitch this idea at 18 to 25-year-olds, which suburb should we locate it in, I would probably have Middle Park at the bottom of the list of Port Phillip suburbs where I would run a program for 18 to 25-year-olds. Why have we chosen Middle Park when it would appear to me, from my limited knowledge of Middle Park, to be probably the oldest demographic of Port Phillip, not the youngest? So this would seem to be an entirely inappropriate place for a program such as this, in my view, if we were trying to locate the programs where they'll get the most benefit and the most use.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Certainly there's two components to it. One is that where Middle Park is located, it is in an area very close to South Melbourne and St Kilda Bayside, as opposed to St Kilda Library, which is Carlisle Street. And we know that Middle Park is very well connected with public transport. It will be very important that we promote such a program to make sure that the local young people know where it is. And equally, we believe that because we're partnering with a youth organisation, they will also help us with that in terms of social media and other campaigns. We know that if a program is of interest to people, they will travel to it. And so it is an opportunity because it's also a space that will be a very different space where young people can come and feel that they can make it their own as well. And so when we look at the other libraries, it's hard to have that dedicated space.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just to add one point too, if we look at some of the, I guess, guidelines and recommendations Vanessa mentioned earlier, the partnership opportunities via the State Library, one of their quite clear recommendations is if we're piloting a new mix of services still under a library umbrella, it's difficult to do that on a library floor. So the Middle Park presents a really good opportunity in terms of it being a discrete sort of self-contained space. So some of the things that we're looking at trialling would actually be quite difficult to engage with on the public library floor in conjunction with our normal sort of business.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Councillor Bond, do you want to move the officer's recommendation?
I'd like to move an alternate recommendation.
Okay, let us hear what that is.
That would be removal of 1.1, the endorsement of the direction, and the recommendation would be just that we approve the consultation of this this proposal, so that we can actually hear from the residents of Middle Park prior to endorsing any direction for the refocusing of Middle Park. So just strike 1.1 and we just leave in the consultation.
Thank you. We'll see if we've got a seconder. Councillors, is there a seconder for Councillor Bond's motion? Councillor Pearl? Councillor Bond, please speak to your motion.
Effectively, I think what we're looking at here, if we endorse this proposal, is we're going to have a library with no books and a librarian. We're still going to be paying a librarian there. So I wonder why we would have that facility sitting there without books. It concerns me greatly that I don't think anyone in Middle Park is aware of what we're actually proposing here, or the wider Middle Park community, and I would really like to hear from them prior to us endorsing a proposal that effectively closes their library or removes the books from their library. I know you have used the word repurpose, which I shudder when I hear that word, because I think it's a little bit of a weasel word for closing the library. Perhaps people won't fall for it. Yeah, I think as you pointed out, Madam Mayor, this would be nothing more than a glorified internet cafe, maybe a little bit of an IT hub where people go down and get their iPhones fixed and a few other IT issues sorted. If we were to have a genuine program where we wanted to attract 18 to 25-year-olds to increase their IT skills and and encourage them to develop programs and businesses and connect with each other, Middle Park isn't the location for it. It would be much better located at the South Melbourne Library or the St Kilda Library. They would have much more chance of a program like this being successful at either of those locations, not Middle Park. So I think we've got a program that I'm dubious about in the wrong location, and we haven't consulted with the community. So therefore I'd like to hear from the community, then come back and reanalyse that strategy if it is the right location for them.
Thank you. Councillor Pearl.
Call me slightly old-fashioned, but I think a library should have some books in it. Otherwise, we should call it something else and call it a spade a spade. So I'm not necessarily saying we shouldn't shut down the function of the traditional function of the library, but if we are talking about repurposing the building and refocusing its activities, from what I've read in the report here, I don't see the business case to stack up of what the new refocused purpose is and the actual target market about how this proposal is going to succeed. It's easy to be cynical about what's been put here, but I don't see any harm in going out to the community and having a frank and honest conversation about what's the usage of that facility, the cost of that facility, the benefit to the overall community, and in parallel doing the research required to come up with the basic information about who the target market is, what the target audience is, what the target objectives are of a repurposed facility that's probably going to be called something other than a library. So let's go through that process, have a frank, open and honest conversation with the community that lives in that area, a small number of which would use that facility regularly. The majority, I suspect, don't, given my personal experience there, but I think they should deserve the right to have more of a open and transparent input into what happens to that facility going forward. If you do go down the route of refocusing this facility in the fashion you've had it, I would like to see you try and increase the probability of success by getting a sponsor, a high-profile sponsor that will be a draw card of some description to bring your target market 18 to 27s into that facility. We have a lot of great businesses in our municipality that focus, that's their target customer set. So if you can bring ambassadors or sponsors into that facility to actually make sure it succeeds from day one, that would be a better way of doing it. But first things first, let's consult with the community about what the purpose of that building should be going forward.
Councillor Crawford.
Can I ask a question of the officers in regarding to clarifying?
Question?
Yeah, I thought there had been some consultation with the local community around this before any of this proceeded. Could you clarify for me, please?
Through you, Madam Mayor, again, we've had some discussions with both current users, neighbours, if you like, in the Middle Park facility. So we've spoken to colleagues in the community facilities team. We've had lengthy discussions with the civic kindergarten coordinator. A lot of civic kindergarten users and families are also regular users of the Middle Park space. So particularly in terms of issues around access to the collection, options in terms of programming that we would look to do in the new space, there was quite a lot of support for what we were talking about, particularly from the civic kindergarten. So we've also got some inroads through colleagues in the eco development team as well that we would be incorporating in the consultation that we're planning to go or proposing to go ahead with as well. So some discussion with at least the local centre users, not to date with the broader community.
Thank you. Councillor Brand.
I think I'm going to vote, speak against Councillor Bond's alternative motion, because I just think it's you get sick of consulting community groups, and this has happened time and time again, I think, here, with nothing in front of them, just putting nothing in front of them and saying, what do you want? It's bound to be a conservative or uninterested response. If you put something in front of them which is imaginative, challenging, different, at least you will have something to react to, something to challenge, something to stretch people's imagination. So I think it's pretty important to put something in front of them. I'm not sure that it's the right proposal, but you'll still get a better consultation by having a proposal in front of them. And I'd be interested to hear what other councillors think about that, but that's certainly my feeling on this. So I would personally prefer the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Simic, are you wanting to speak?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I will speak against the amended recommendation or the alternate recommendation. Also, I'm not in the business of motion. Correct. Thank you for the correction. Not the business of closing down libraries tonight. I think we need to conduct the consultation. It needs to be meaningful, and I think what officers have set out is that that process is underway. I do think that we want to utilise the space and continue programs in the space in the meantime. While we've been talking, I've looked, and 20% of people in Middle Park are under the age of 20. So to suggest, like was suggested by Councillor Bond before, that there's no young people, or this isn't an area where we should be targeting young people's engagement, I don't believe that to be true. We have a perfect opportunity here. We've heard from officers who have worked with staff, who've worked in the space for quite some time now. So listening to their advice to continue activities and to have programs running while the consultation takes place makes perfect sense to me. I think it will lead to a better outcome for the community in the long run.
Councillor Crawford.
And Madam Mayor, I'll foreshadow that if this motion were to fail, that I will move the original officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Crawford.
I'll be speaking against Councillor Bond's alternate motion there. There may have not been direct consultation with the current, other than the current users and the wider community, but we have done a lot of consultation over the past 6 months or this year with the creative community in the city of Port Phillip. And when I was campaigning, one of the key things they were saying is there is a lack of creative spaces where freelance artists, directors or writers can go and use Wi-Fi and network with each other. We do not have any of those spaces that exist in this city. So this is an opportunity in a space that's underutilised as a library as it stands to do something innovative and take it out to the community and consult on it. Now, the youth market is also something we don't provide a lot of spaces for or innovative things for in this municipality, hence they go elsewhere where there's hipper and cooler things, so maybe it's time to start looking into that space. So it's not just the young people, there's a lot of creative people that would also use the space. I also note that Middle Park Library is close enough to Park Towers and the primary schools all around there. On their way home from school they could drop in and do things in that space. So I don't think it is completely isolated. Whether all these things work, there's also the opportunity to do, I don't know, more. There's a lot of creative innovation ideas there, small performances, little art, exhibits. There's all sorts of things we can do that are outside the box that perhaps what we think a library could be. So maybe it's a 21st century innovation space is what we should be calling it. But I think it's an idea definitely worth canvassing with the wider community. But libraries are... this particular space is not working as maximised, and we're all about maximising the space and multi-purposing other buildings, so why not this space?
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Baxter.
Look, I won't be supporting Councillor Bond's motion. I'll be supporting the original officer's recommendation. I just want to note that I had a couple of people here say some derogatory things, saying it's sort of like it's a glorified internet cafe. My wife is a graphic design artist. I know a lot of people who work in graphic design, who work in visual communication, and the software that they have to work with is so expensive that they have to very much specialise in one type of software because they can't afford to mix and match with different things. And then all of a sudden they get a job that requires them to use a couple of different types of software. What are they to do? Are they to make this huge investment when, oftentimes they're just freelancing, they're just trying to build their portfolio? If they had the opportunity, and I was actually talking to my wife about this a couple of weeks ago, she was saying if she had the opportunity to go to a place where that prohibitive cost wasn't a worry, to play with it, to work out whether this was something that she'd want to continue working with in her in the practice of her work, that would just be incredibly valuable and would unlock so many opportunities for her. And I've had other people give me similar feedback. So it's not a glorified internet cafe. It's the difference between someone being able to express their creative abilities or not, essentially. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Councillor Baxter. Councillor Cross.
I'm speaking in favour of the resolution, the motion. First of all, to the officers, thank you so much for embarking on this incredibly difficult conversation. And it's really important that we have these sort of conversations about every asset in our community, and thanks for that. Secondly, I wanted to say that I think that the current, the wording of the officer's recommendation is does offend the notion of full and frank conversations. So if we preempt it, we'll be I sense we'll be torn to shreds. And even though it would and I've got views that are outlier views. I know that if we took a poll on my ideas that I'd get one vote and that'd be me. Yes, that's right. So I just think that we would be courting trouble and we would be called Nazi book burners. And like, I'm a person who's written 5 books. I'm not a book burner. But I don't think that we should be lending books from that particular side. And the final point final 2 points I wanted to make was that we're about to embark on this new idea of creative hubs. It's, it's impossible to imagine what would be the extent of this business. We're about to open a new business. Or is it a related business that goes on in a library? I don't know. And so I think we need to unpack particularly the financial issues. I've heard a lot of, we'll be providing software for, exotic software that costs a fortune. We'll be doing this, we'll be doing that. Let's define the business. Let's work out what the business is, and let's see whether we are the best organisation to provide it. And that's a big, big decision. And finally, in terms of creative hubs, they rely on a critical mass. So the Brillo building in New York, which provided the creative hub for the American music industry. First of all, it was private enterprise. Secondly, it just was a large building with every single business that you would need to create a pop industry. And, it absolutely worked. Neil Diamond, Carole King, and all of the designers and engineers that they needed. So creative hubs work. Is it a new business that we want to and can get into competently? And I think we really need to do that thinking before we press the go button on it. And I think we really need to not preempt any consultation. As much as I'd love to get the books out of there, if we do that, we'll be kicked to death.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Bond, would you like to close?
Yes. Just to finish off by saying I had an email from a resident not long ago concerned about what was happening at the Middle Park Library, and she's involved in a group down there, runs her group there, so I would put her in the category of regular user. Texted her earlier to let her know that this report was coming to us tonight, completely unaware that that was the case and hasn't read its contents. So I very much think we're, preempting the community here. We're making this decision without hearing from them, and as Dick said, we're probably going to get torn to shreds because libraries are the core business of local government, and over the last couple of months we've spent an awful lot of money putting up banners on our town halls for various federal issues, whilst at the same time we're slowly backing away from libraries, the core business of local government. So I think it says a lot about the performance of this council over the last couple of months.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's lost. Councillor Simic. Councillor Bond has called a division, so I'll put that again. All those in favour? Councillor Bond, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Gross. All those against? Councillor Simic, Councillor Brand, Councillor Copsey, Councillor Baxter, Councillor Crawford and Councillor Voss. That motion has failed. Councillor Simic, you foreshadowed an alternative.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move the officer's original recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to your motion?
Well, just to say, Madam Mayor, that we have, in the past, as the officers have set out, we have had feedback from the community on this issue, and yes, wholeheartedly support consultation taking place. That's point 2 in this proposal. So I'll be doing everything I can to make sure that the consultation goes off as much as possible. And Andrew, if you, Councillor Bond, if you pass me the number of the constituent or let me know how to contact them, I'll do that ahead of time so that they do have time to participate. It is important to participate in consultation and for us to do that as well as possible. In the meantime, we are not, we are making sure that the space is utilised as much as possible, and that we are doing and improving activities in the space. So I think that the officers have done an incredible amount of work to bring us to the point that we're at tonight. Like I said, there's more work to be done. I look forward to being part of that work, but in the meantime, I look forward to us utilising that space as much as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Crawford.
I just want to add, I look forward to the feedback from the community to see what interesting ideas of the kind of programs that can be run there and other innovative things that could take place in that space.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Oh, Councillor Pearl.
Yeah, I don't support closing. I don't support closing the library, and the book should stay there until we consult with our community. So I oppose this motion.
Okay. Would you like to close?
Yes. No.
Oh, sorry. Would you like to speak?
I'd like
Councillor
to
Bond.
speak. Thank you. Yeah, same as Councillor Pearl. I certainly do not support closing the library, removing the books before we have even told our community what we're about to do. These are the sorts of decisions that gets communities up in arms, and I'm sure, knowing the good folk of Middle Park, we will hear from them loudly and strongly over the next month on this terrible decision.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Would anyone else like to speak? For or against? Councillor Simic, would you like to close? No? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried. Councillor Bond's called a division. So I'll put that motion again. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Brand, Councillor Simic, Councillor Voss, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Baxter. All those against? Councillor Gross, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Bond. That motion is carried. Great. We'll move on to 8.10, which is the Palais Theatre Community Purpose Reservation Policy. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Copsey to move, Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak?
This is a next step in the important governance arrangements that we have to make sure that we secure the community benefits from the Palais Theatre lease. It's excellent to see the Palais up and running, and I look forward to the community being able to access the facility, including some of the biggest highlights of the year, in my opinion, are currently held on the community days, including the Sacred Heart Heart of Kilda concert, which is coming up soon. So it's a pleasure to be speaking in support of adoption of this policy this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Gross? Would anyone else like to speak to this? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Then we'll move to 8.11, which is the Health and Wellbeing Implementation Strategy. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? I have a really minor question. At item 8 in the report, just didn't quite understand what the sentence says. I think it might be a typo. Actually, I think it's too minor to worry about. Councillor Pearl.
Just a quick one. How much did this... Do we have an estimate of how much it cost council to produce this document in terms of dollar, time, resources spent, consultants, etc.?
Through you, Madam Mayor, Ms Hooper was taken offline from her usual coordinator role for about 10 weeks, so 10 weeks out of 52 of her coordinator salary, so that's how we resourced it.
Thank you, Ms Jeffs. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Crawford?
I'm just trying to find it. It was interesting to me, and I maybe... Oh, you probably can't answer it, but, you know, it was interesting to me that in our municipality that 32% of residents hold low levels of support for equal relationships between males and females. And I was curious as to their methodology. Like, is that the kind of question that they ask to sort of signify that? But maybe that's a question you cannot answer.
Ms Hooper?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I can get the exact methodology, as I can't quite recall it at the moment, but it's a question that is aimed to gauge the level of support for equal relationships that's run through a Vic Health survey. Yeah.
Any further questions, councillors? If not, we've got an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Crawford to move, Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak? Councillor Copsey?
Thank you to the officers for all your hard work on this. It's a very substantial document, our health and wellbeing plan, and it's great to see it coming into being. Of course, this being the first time that we've had the health and wellbeing strategy integrated as part of the council plan and budget. So Port Phillip leading the way again, and best of luck with the implementation plan.
Anybody else like to speak? If not, then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Well done. 8.17, Council Policy for Fraud and Corruption Control. Councillors, any questions of the officers? Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Pearl to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak?
Very important document, and I endorse it.
Councillor Pearl, no. Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Well done. Getting through these. 8.18, Audit and Risk Committee, the appointment of the external member.
I'd like to move that recommendation.
Councillor, so subject to no questions. Councillor Gross to move. Councillor Pearl to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to that?
A well-deserved appointment of the extended term.
Would anyone else like to speak to that? I also endorse Councillor Gross's comments. I was part of the committee, I guess, that made the recommendation, and I'm very happy to see her back again. She is a star. So I will put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. 8.19, which is the alteration to council meeting timetable 2017. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Pearl to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak? Councillor Gross. Anybody else? No? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Notices of motion. There are none. Item 10, which is reports by council delegates. Councillors, any reports? Councillor Brand.
I'll make a very brief report.
A reminder, it's 10 o'clock at night.
Yes, I know. Just reporting on behalf of Lyndon Newart. They had their annual postcard show opening the other night, spread over 2 nights. One was a very successful, specially invited VIP guest type event, which saw a lot of artwork being sold and a lot of people joining up as sort of coterie members. And then the public opening of the postcard show was quite a fantastic event where about 1,000 people went through it from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till about 8 o'clock at night. And it was just an amazing event in a place outside the city bounds, and I think everybody was surprised and thrilled by it.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Gross.
Metropolitan Waste Resource Recovery Group. I went to the meeting, had fun. MAV State Council, went there, had fun. Port Phillip's resolution on graffiti only motion supported unanimously.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Bond.
I'd just like to report that a Millet Jedinak hat-trick has put Australia through to the finals of the World Cup.
Councillor Bond, excuse me, everyone. Are there any other reports? Any other reports by council delegates? No? Thank you. Now we'll move on to 11, which is urgent business. And councillors, we have one urgent business which has been brought to us by the CEO. So, councillors, I need a mover and a seconder for the council to consider an item of urgent business in relation to seeking council approval for an unbudgeted expenditure relating to the purchase of hostile vehicle mitigation barriers. Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Baxter to second. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour?
It's procedural.
No, it's a motion to consider urgent business.
Thank you. I'll now call on the CEO to speak to this urgent business item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'm going to ask Ms Jeffs to speak on our behalf. This has been under Ms Jeffs' management. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we appreciate that councillors have not had a chance to digest this information. So I'll read out some supporting information regarding this recommendation. In August this year, the federal government released Australia's strategy for protecting crowded places from terrorism. And following from the recommendations within the strategy, we've evaluated and assessed major events within the municipality, and in particular St Kilda Festival and other large events such as Pride March are on our minds. And we understand both the importance, urgency and the challenges of securing temporary vehicle barriers in that time frame, particularly with Christmas in the middle of all that. So this request is for expenditure of $270,000 to authorise the CEO to purchase these vehicle barriers in order to support our major events in the City of Port Phillip.
Thank you, Ms Jeffs. Councillors, are there any questions of the officers in relation to this? Councillor Simic.
Madam Mayor, so delegation to the amount of, so we're approving $270,000 including GST for unbudgeted expenditure in this instance. Have officers explored any options, or are there any options for us to consider as to how we might be able to minimise these costs? For example, buying the barriers with other municipalities, sharing the cost with them, sharing the use of them. Have those things been explored?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we do meet our other inner metro councils to discuss issues like this. Unfortunately, we all have major events, and so we, if we were to buy them, we'd still need this number for us for our events, and the other municipalities have major events at the same time. So it's something that would be very difficult for us to share. And the challenge has been for us previously that when we have gone to rent barriers, as happened last year, the City of Melbourne had already taken most of them, and so we were unable to rent them at that time. So this is really planning for the summer, upcoming summer.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Crawford.
I guess I'm just wanting to ask a couple of questions. So obviously in the city they've installed all the big cement blocks and bollards, so that is not suitable for our purposes. That's one question. And obviously there's quite a number that we are looking to purchase, and is that to cope with the extent of St Kilda Fest and the size of those kind of events?
Through you, Madam Mayor. This is the purchase of temporary barriers that can be moved so that there's some agility and that we can respond to specific events. And with our partners, such as Victoria Police, depending on, there may be some short-term decisions that might be made for particular events. There is other work being done across council for permanent barriers, which is separate to this particular discussion.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I might just add that the Australia's strategy for protecting crowded places from terrorism did come out with some specific guidelines about the quality, strength, speed testing, a whole range of parameters, and that's what we've based this on. So, and some of the other barriers that are sort of either more permanent or different, many of them don't meet the new guidelines, so we've based this on those guidelines.
Councillor Simic.
Have we been in contact with Victoria Police to discuss with them the option of them contributing to the purchase of the temporary bollards?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so we have and will continue discussions both with Victoria Police and also attempt to source any federal government funding that will become available. So we're very much about cost minimisation, balanced with the need to have something in place by the time we need them for, particularly for the events early next year.
I've just got a question. Do we know what they look like? Are they ugly? Will they fit into our environment? I know it's just an aesthetic thing and doesn't have nothing to do with safety, but I think it's something I'd like to know.
Madam Mayor, they're fairly ugly. But during the planning and the setup, I think we will try to minimise the open ugliness of them. So I'm sure there's a range of treatments, temporary treatments that we can provide around them so that they don't stand out too much.
Thank you. Councillor Copsey.
I'd just encourage officers to do that. One of the things that's great about our events is that they're a place that feel welcoming and safe rather than feeling like you're entering a militarised zone. So anything we can do that's not going to diminish the celebratory atmosphere of some of the great events we run, I think would be great.
Any further questions, councillors? So I will now call on a councillor to move a motion in relation to this urgent item of business. Councillor Pearl to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak? Speak, you'll reserve your right. Yep. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Simic.
I just can't help but feel that with the new guidelines that the federal government's set out, that the federal government should be contributing to this, to the upgrade in some way. It seems to that extent like a cost shift. Balancing that out with the need to support and make sure that our community is safe is something that we have to do tonight. And on balance, I'd like to support this measure. But I do know that it is the federal government who has been who introduced these the strategy, and as a result, should be contributing more.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Pearl, would you like to close?
Our primary objective is to protect our community, and this is core business for us. So the scourge of terrorism shouldn't be underestimated, and recent events globally and locally would inform us that this is a expensive thing to do, but a very prudent thing to do to protect our residents and protect the people that visit our events. In terms of Councillor Simic's comment about federal government cost shifting, I would note that there's a Safer Communities Fund, and I would suspect these barriers would probably meet the grant criteria provided by the federal government to assist agencies such as ourselves to absorb the costs of protecting our community against terrorism. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Councillors, do you have any items of urgent business? Then, councillors, we'll move to item 12, which is confidential matters. And we have one item which is confidential for 253 to 273 Normanby Road, South Melbourne. I'll now call on the councillor to move, Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Pearl to second, that the meeting be closed to the members of the public in accordance with Section 89 2H of the Local Government Act 1989. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. And good night, Teresa.